Chapter 1034. This. Ding Xiang immediately felt a toothache. This guy still didn't give up. He couldn't help but look at Song Yun Xan for help. To be able to cultivate to this level, he didn't want to get involved in the grudge between Yu Qianqiu and Mu Bing. Although Yu Qianqiu saved his life, there were many ways to repay the favor. There was no need to throw his life away again. If he angered Wu Xiong, there was no guarantee that the Hidden Dragon Manor wouldn't abandon him at a critical moment. Yu Qianqiu, if it was any other time, I would be more than happy to see you and Mu Bing fight to the death. Grey Cloud Xan frowned and said in a low voice, but now. Everyone is well aware of it, so there's no need for me to say anything more. Don't say that I didn't warn you. Even if you kill Mu Bing, Wu Xiong won't find trouble with you for the time being out of respect for the Immortal Emperor. However, after the Immortal Emperor's wedding, Wu Xiong will have 10,000 ways to make you wish you were dead. Damn. Isn't this bullshit? Wu Xiong still has a chance after this? I'm afraid your Song Yun Xan will be the first to come after me. Yu Qianqiu rolled his eyes on the spot. In reality, he also knew that he couldn't kill Mu Bing in front of everyone. Not to mention that there were a lot of people stopping him. Even if he wanted to kill him, he couldn't do it in front of everyone. If the news was leaked, even if Wu Xiong wanted to save his face, the world commerce would be the first to suffer. After all, the Immortal Emperor's decree was given to him. It could only protect him temporarily and not the people of the world commerce. Unless he could kill everyone present to silence them, it was a bit unrealistic. In short, if he wanted to kill Mu Bing now, he couldn't leave any evidence. As long as Wu Xiong didn't have any evidence, he would be wary of the Immortal Emperor and wouldn't dare to casually touch the world commerce. Otherwise, with the Immortal Emperor's power and tactics, he would probably turn a blind eye to it. There's no hurry to kill him now. Yu Qianqiu stared at the disappearing flowing light and narrowed his eyes. I just feel that it's a bit strange. This guy has Wu Xiong's support in the immortal world and has plenty of opportunities to earn money. Why would he suddenly come to the underworld? There's no need to go through so much trouble just to deal with me. Furthermore, he had mingled with the people from the netherworld. Presumably, the cultivation of the people around him was not low. This matter must have something to do with Wu Xiong. Otherwise, Mu Bing wouldn't be able to command the people of the underworld. Maybe there was some secret behind this matter. What if Wu Xiong did something shameful behind the Immortal Emperor's back? My premonitions have always been accurate. Aren't you interested in knowing? Elder Ding, follow me. I promise I won't do anything. He was speaking from the bottom of his heart. He did suspect that Mu Bing was up to something. However, Yu Qianqiu had wronged Mu Bing. Even in his wildest dreams, Yu Qianqiu would never have imagined that Mu Bing had spent so much effort to come after him. What would Yu Qianqiu think if he knew? What if Wu Xiong did something shameful behind the Immortal Emperor's back? Although the reason was a bit far-fetched, Grey Cloud Xian and Ding Xiang couldn't help but feel their hearts palpitate. If they really happened to have something on Wu Xiong, then it would be very useful at a critical moment. When Ding Xiang saw Grey Cloud Xan nod slightly in a non-committal manner, he immediately drove the flying shuttle and chased after him. Sect Master. Before the subordinate could finish speaking, Mu Bing immediately shouted, "Shut up." His heart was filled with hatred. Joining the Four Links Chamber of Commerce halfway was just joining halfway. If his disciple, Nan Tianlong, was present just now, he would definitely protect him and not embarrass him like this. That disciple's expression stiffened, but he still braced himself and said, "It seems like they're catching up again." Although his cultivation was a level higher than Mu Bing's, Mu Bing had a good daughter and found a powerful man, so he could only compromise. Oh. Mu Bing suddenly turned around. Judging from the vague outline of the people, they were indeed catching up again. Deng Shang's expression slightly changed. He was actually quite afraid of death. If he had a bit of courage, he wouldn't have made a fuss and had to have his daughter come out to support him. Although he could use his connections to intimidate others, if someone really wanted to use force against him, he would immediately be afraid. The others also turned around to look. Dong Lai Shun slightly narrowed his eyes and said, "Sect Master Mu, if I'm not wrong, the purpose of your visit this time is to take the life of that Yu Qianqiu." Mu Bing swallowed his saliva. Now he was a little regretful that he came to the netherworld to find Yu Qianqiu. At worst, he could just wait until the Immortal Emperor's wedding. At that time, there would be many ways to deal with him. He tilted his head and smiled awkwardly. Since Mr. Dong has already guessed it, I won't hide it anymore. That's right. They have already caught up. I wonder if Mr. Dong has any way to solve the current crisis? Crisis? Dong Lai Shun glanced at him with a slightly disdainful expression. He turned back to look at the two meditation cultivators with military aura and laughed. Presumably with Sect Master Mu's ability, you still can't mobilize the people of the Dark Army to help. It seems like it's for the sake of your son-in-law Wuxiong. As expected of the External Affairs Commander of the Immortal Palace. I've never heard of him having dealings with our great king. I didn't think that they would be secretly communicating. He then looked at Mu Bing and said, so it seems that Commander Wu is secretly supporting you in taking action against Yu Qianqiu. However, I'm a little curious. Is Commander Wu not afraid of the Immortal Emperor's thunderous rage if the news is leaked? You should know that Yu Qianqiu carries the Immortal Emperor's decree with him. Mu Bing's expression immediately became ugly. He didn't know where this Dong Laishun came from, but he knew that the two meditation cultivators with the pseudonyms of Black Big and Black Two were indeed people of the Dark Army. Before coming here, Wuxiong had told him that the Dark Army would send these two people to be his contacts. If he really encountered any trouble that he couldn't solve, he could ask these two people to contact the people of the Dark Army for help. Mu Bing's expression was ugly. I don't think Mr. Dong will leak this matter. Of course not. I came here on the Great King's orders. If I messed up, how would I report back? Dong Laishun smiled and shook his head. Sect Master Mu's two subordinates have a higher cultivation than Sect Master Mu. As the Sect Master, do you think you can order them around? Although the two people that Mu Bing brought with him didn't like hearing this, they still had to endure it. Not to mention that the person who said this was an early-stage Netherworld Emperor. He wasn't someone they could afford to offend. Seeing that Dong Laishun was getting further and further away, Mu Bing looked at the flying shuttle that was getting closer and closer and said with some anxiety, when I was recruiting talents, I recruited them. It's not strange that their cultivation is higher than mine. Mr. Dong, the most important thing right now is how to get rid of those people behind us. This Yu Qianqiu is famous for being a madman and is capable of doing anything. No. Sect Master Mu is mistaken. The most important thing right now is to not let others know that you are targeting Yu Qianqiu and that Great Commander Wuxiong is involved. This is something you are doing behind Great Commander Wuxiong's back. Dong Laishun smiled and waved his hand. Suddenly his hands grew longer. His palms shot out like ghostly claws and instantly grabbed the heads of the two subordinates that Mu Bing brought with him. Their brains splattered on the spot. The two didn't even have time to scream before they lost their lives. Their corpses were thrown out of the flying shuttle by the two withered arms. As a result, Mu Bing was so scared that his face turned pale. He retreated and said in a panic, what do you want to do? Dong Laishun retracted his arms and his terrifying and sinister arms instantly returned to normal. He looked at Mu Bing and shook his head slightly. He finally understood why the king had sent him to do such a thing. This guy actually brought two people that he couldn't completely control. Sooner or later Wuxiong would be killed. At the same time, he also faintly guessed that the king and Wuxiong might have some secret that couldn't be exposed. Previously, when he guessed Mu Bing's intentions, he thought that the king had sent him to distract Ashy Cloud Messenger so that Mu Bing could find an opportunity to kill Yu Qianqiu. This made him rather unhappy because he didn't have the slightest confidence in dealing with the Heartless Palace's 3 swords and 1 sword drawing style. Now, it seemed that this wasn't the case at all. The main purpose was to prevent the situation from getting out of control. As for the secret between the king and Wuxiong, that wasn't something that he should worry about. The king clearly trusted him by sending him to do this. If he went overboard and inquired about the secret that he shouldn't know, he would be courting death. But what made Dong Laishun feel strange was that if there really was a secret, why would Wuxiong do such a stupid thing? Because the risk of exposing the relationship between the two sides was too great. If it was just to get rid of Yu Qianqiu, the king could have sent an expert to do it alone. There was no need to put Mu Bing in the middle. Because even if Jin Tai was unhappy, he wouldn't have the ability to intervene in the underworld. Protect me. Mu Bing hid behind Black Two, who was sent by the army of Onyx. Black Two said expressionlessly, Mr. Mu, don't panic. Mr. Dong has already discussed it with us before we made our move. He did the right thing. Those 2 people must be eliminated. Mu Bing looked at these people in horror. He suddenly felt like he had fallen into a wolf's den. Dong Laishun acted as if nothing had happened. Looking at the flying shuttle that was gradually catching up, he smiled and said, Sect leader Mu is actually worrying too much. The Heartless Palace is under the control of others. Ashy Cloud Messenger doesn't have the guts to go against Great Commander Wuxiong. According to our previous judgment, they were originally going to Twilight City. They were just continuing on their way. They shouldn't be chasing after us. But that Yu Qianqiu is protected by Ashy Cloud Messenger. It is indeed a troublesome matter. If we don't lure Ashy Cloud Messenger away, I'm afraid that we can't kill Yu Qianqiu. That 3-in-1 sword drawing style is really not something that anyone can block. Hearing this, Mu Bing gradually recovered from his fright. Thinking about how Wu Xiong had no reason to harm him, his courage immediately grew and he slowly asked, "If that's the case, does Mr. Dong have any way to resolve this?" If he didn't have scruples about Ashy Cloud Messenger, he would have already asked everyone to kill Yu Qianqiu. How could he have humiliated himself? Chapter 1035. Dong Lai Shun looked at the flying shuttle and smiled. With the protection of the ash-gray cloud letter, there's no good way. But we're not far from Twilight City. We'll see when we get there. There is always a way to get him away from Yu Qianqiu. Good. Then let him live for a few more days. Mu Bing gritted his teeth and clenched his fists. His resentment was not gone for a long time. Ding Xiang drove the flying shuttle and followed at a distance of nearly a kilometer. He did not widen the distance but did not get too close either. The two sides moved forward quickly, one in front and one behind. There was no surprise or danger along the way. After a full 5 days, as the flying shuttle in front slowly slowed down, Ding Xiang also slowed down. He looked back and said to them, "We have arrived at Twilight City." Needless to say, they had already seen the distant plains dotted with lights like the stars in the night sky. The area was not small, but for the underworld that was immersed in the night, it seemed a bit different. Among them, except for Yu Qianqiu, everyone had been here before, so Yu Qianqiu looked around curiously. The flying shuttle carrying Mu Bing and the others had already dived into the waning light. The flying shuttle behind them was about to land when Yu Qianqiu shouted, "Wait!" Ding Xiang understood and stopped the flying shuttle in the air. Most people who came here for the first time would inevitably look at the environment of Twilight City curiously. Below was a huge city wall, crisscrossed rows of houses, and the lights shining through the windows were the little stars in the distance. There were few tall buildings in the city wall. Occasionally, a 3-story attic was already considered high. The seemingly disorderly but orderly streets were intertwined like a net. The strange thing was that most of the lights were lit in the rooms, and there were few illumination objects on the wide or narrow streets outside. In the center of the city, there was a square that wasn't small. In the middle of the square, there was a circular foundation that was 10 meters tall and nearly 100 meters tall. However, on the foundation, there was a huge snake statue that was also nearly 100 meters tall, towering into the night sky. Unfortunately, this snake-shaped sculpture was a broken stone sculpture. To be more precise, it was a statue with a snake's body and a human head. The lower half of the statue's body was supported by a snake's coiled tail. There was nothing above the shoulder. The reason why one could tell that the upper body was that of a woman was because there was a pair of large and plump breasts exposed to the air on the naked upper body. Further up, the shoulders and head were damaged for some unknown reason. The flying shuttle they were on was not far from the giant statue. It looked like a tiny dot in comparison. Yu Qianqiu stared at it for a long time and suddenly asked, "Xinyu, what does this statue mean?" Zhang Yunxin and Ding Xiang also looked at Xinyu. They also did not know why this statue was standing there. Xinyu said respectfully, "I don't know what it means. It is said that when Twilight City was discovered, this broken statue was here but no one knows why." "Then why is it called Twilight City?" Yu Qianqiu continued to ask. Xinyu replied with a bitter smile, "I don't know either. I don't know who first discovered this place. Anyway, the name Twilight City has been passed down for countless years, and no one can explain what it means. It's just a broken ruin. It doesn't matter what it is called. Why do you have to ask?" Zhang Yunxin said impatiently. Yu Qianqiu nodded in agreement. Just as he was about to say that they should find a place to rest, he suddenly heard the sound of crashing waves in the distance. It was coming from the direction the statue was facing. Yu Qianqiu turned around and saw a strong wind blowing from afar. His clothes fluttered in the wind. He was sensitive to the humidity in the air and asked, "Is there a lake in front?" Ding Xiang laughed and said, "It's not a lake. Not far from here is the Styx River. Twilight City is built on the bank of the Styx River." Jianghu added, "The place directly opposite Twilight City is the widest basin of the Styx River. So that's how it is." Yu Qianqiu nodded slightly and glanced at Twilight City. From time to time he could see people flying in from all directions, and he could also see people flying in all directions. His eyes finally fell on the exquisite giant statue. Although it was broken and had experienced countless years, it was still difficult to hide its vividness. The broken statue seemed to be using the whistling wind to tell something. Glory? Sadness? Or something else? Yu Qianqiu had this feeling. He listened attentively, but he could not understand the language of the wind. It could only be understood but not expressed? However, he did not have such a high level of understanding, so he still got nothing. After a while, Yu Qianqiu turned to look at Songyun Xin and Ding Xiang. He smiled and said, "I think both of you have a place to stay here. Where do you think you should stay?" Songyun Xin was silent. Ding Xiang glanced at him. He could imagine how awkward it would be to protect his enemy in front of his fellow disciples. He chuckled and said, "If you don't mind, you can stay at my hidden dragon villa for the time being." After that, he drove the flying shuttle around the giant sculpture and flew diagonally forward. The hidden dragon villa's foothold in Twilight City occupied a whole street. The street was not long, perhaps it should be called an alley. Dozens of houses on both sides of the street were occupied by the people of the hidden dragon villa. It was unknown how many people lived there, but from the hundreds of people that Ding Xiang brought in front of the dragon transformation gate, it could be seen that there were at least more than 100 people. Elder Ding Xiang was sent by the hidden dragon mountain villa to guard this place. After he arranged for them to stay in a small stone house, he acted as if he had nothing to do with them. After exchanging some pleasantries with them, he said he had something to do and left. Even when Yu Qianqiu asked him to send someone to check on the situation of Mu Bing and the others, he politely refused. In fact, he did not want to get involved with these people anymore. He did not get to eat meat and almost got himself into trouble. When they arrived at the destination, they naturally parted ways. Yu Qianqiu was concerned about the location where Mu Bing and the others were staying. He could not stay idle and wanted to take Jianghu out for a walk. How could Songyun Xin let him run around? It was known that this was a place where killing was not against the law. He had no choice but to follow. The three of them went out and shuttled through the maze-like streets. Yu Qianqiu looked around at the exotic stone buildings around him. In fact, the entire Twilight City was built with large and small stones. The shapes were similar. Although simple and elegant, it was a maze. The vicissitudes of life lingered on the streets. There were almost no pedestrians on the streets. Most of them were rising and falling in the air. After walking east and west for a few streets, even Songyun Xin and Jianghu lost their way. The three of them had to fly into the air to find the direction. Yu Qianqiu looked around and finally found the place where Mu Bing and the others landed. He took the lead and flew over. Songyun Xin and Jianghu looked at each other and immediately understood that he was still thinking about Mu Bing and the others. However, when they landed on the street, they found that it was a large main street. There were no less than 1,000 stone houses on both sides. There was no way to find where Mu Bing and the others lived. He couldn't possibly interrogate them one by one, right? It would be impolite to use their divine sense to investigate. This was the netherworld. Who knew who lived in the houses on both sides? Yu Qianqiu thought about it and decided to ask Ding Xiang for help. He had already rejected Songyun Xin's request to ask the people from the Heartless Palace for help. He said that he had no obligation to do so, and Yu Qianqiu could not force him. Therefore, the three of them directly returned to the place where they came from. They broke into a house on the side and asked a disciple of the hidden dragon villa where Ding Xiang was. The disciple knew that they were guests brought by Elder Ding, so he led them to Ding Xiang's residence. However, before they entered the door, they saw a large group of people in the sky. They landed on the roofs on both sides of the street and surrounded the entire street. These people were all dressed in black armor and had swords on their waists. They stared at the people below. Yu Qianqiu had seen the same people at the exit of the netherworld. The army of the dark underworld. A surprised voice was heard. The disciples of the hidden dragon villa came out in shock. They looked at the people surrounding the entire street in shock. Ding Xiang naturally came out in shock too. He was not in the mood to care when he saw Yu Qianqiu and the others standing at the door. He walked to the street and looked around. Finally, he cupped his fists towards a person dressed like a general on the roof and said, "Oh, it's General Liu." He pointed to the people on the roofs and said, "The hidden dragon villa has always strictly followed the rules of the netherworld. What is the meaning of this?" "Elder Ding, something has happened around here recently. I was ordered to investigate all suspicious people. I heard that you brought back 3 strangers. Please hand them over so that I can bring them back for interrogation," General Liu said coldly. Yu Qianqiu and the others looked at each other. He must be referring to the 3 of them. This. Ding Xiang looked at Grey Cloud Xin and the others who happened to be standing beside him. He immediately pointed to the 3 people on the roof and smiled bitterly. "General Liu, you've misunderstood. They are not suspicious. One of them is Great Priest Grey Cloud Xin of Heartless Palace, the other is Sect Master Yu Qianqiu of World Commerce, and the last one is from the River Styx tribe." "How dare you?" General Liu shouted coldly. "Ding Xiang, since when is it your hidden dragon villa's turn to interfere with the army of the dark underworld? It's not up to you to decide whether they are suspicious or not. I will investigate everything. Guards, take the 3 of them away. He pointed at Grey Cloud Xin and the others. Ding Xiang immediately smiled bitterly at the 3 of them and slowly retreated, indicating that there was nothing he could do. A dozen soldiers immediately dashed down from the roofs. They even took out shackles and handcuffs and pressed towards the 3 of them. Yu Qianqiu was speechless as he dug his ears. He wasn't afraid, but he couldn't understand how he could be so unlucky as to encounter a game of soldiers catching thieves the moment he arrived. He didn't know what was going on around him, but strangers were being taken back for interrogation. Chapter 1036. Old Song. What do we do? Yu Qianqiu bared his teeth as he looked at the approaching soldiers. He knew almost nothing about the Onyx army, and he didn't know if this damn place would capture people at the drop of a hat. He could only ask for the Ash Cloud Letter's opinion first. It didn't matter if they were to arrest him for questioning. After all, an upright person was not afraid of a crooked shadow. However, if it was easy to be wrongly accused, then he would naturally resist. After all, the number of people who died unjustly was uncountable. It was meaningless for him to join the ranks of the dead. No one has ever used torture tools on Song Yunxin. Song Yunxin touched the storage bracelet on his left wrist with his right hand and stared coldly at the general standing on the roof. If you want to bring us in for questioning, we are willing to cooperate. However, if you want to use torture tools on us before we understand the situation, I will not allow it. After all, he had been to the Netherworld and knew how powerful the shackles of the Onyx army were. Once they were bound, it would be very difficult to break them. If the other party wanted to play tricks on him, it would be equivalent to losing 90% of his strength. It was no different from seeking death. How could he allow himself to be restrained before he understood the situation? Hearing this, Yu Qianqiu immediately nudged the panicking Xinyu with his elbow, signaling him to get ready. Xinyu was now deeply depressed. He regretted setting up the Mirage Mist formation. Now trouble kept coming one after another. On the roof, General Lu said indifferently, "You want to resist? It's not really resistance. I've made myself very clear. If it's just a question, we will cooperate." Song Yunxin narrowed his eyes and said, "But everything has to be reasonable. If you're being unreasonable, our Heartless Palace's sword-drawing technique is not to be trifled with." "You dare threaten the Onyx army?" General Lu's eyes flickered. "Do you believe that I can kill every single person of your Heartless Palace in the Netherworld with a single command from me?" Song Yunxin nodded slowly. "I believe you have that ability. However, I see that you're only a beginner Underworld Emperor. Do you believe that once I draw my sword, you won't even have the chance to give the order?" These words were indeed spoken with the demeanor of an expert, causing Yu Qianqiu to have a whole new level of respect for him. He actually dared to say such words to the general of the army of the Dark Underworld, which deterred the underworld. However, after looking at the sky, he immediately understood why the old man was so stubborn. It was because he was riding a tiger and couldn't back down. At this time, there was already a large group of people standing in the air to watch the show. They were all attracted by the commotion here. The people here were all strange and their clothes were all strange. The people of the Heartless Palace were also among them. When an elder of the Heartless Palace who was in charge realized that the main character of the commotion was actually the chief elder of the sect, he was instantly shocked. He hurriedly dodged and bowed to Qing Yunxin. "Greetings, Great Deacon." Then he turned to General Lu on the roof and cupped his fists. "General Lu, I think there must be some misunderstanding. He is our sect's high priest, Song Yunxin." General Lu's gaze fell on Song Yunxin's hand that was stroking the storage bracelet. He said lightly, "Since the Heartless Palace can testify for you, there is no need for torture tools. However, an interrogation is inevitable. If the matter has nothing to do with you, we will naturally let you go. If it is related to you, even the head of the Heartless Palace will not be able to save you. Take him away." Since the other party had made a concession, Song Yunxin had no other choice. After all, he still had to consider the Heartless Palace. As for Yu Qianqiu, he fully believed that Song Yunxin would not harm him for the time being, so he made do with it. As for Xinyu, he naturally followed Yu Qianqiu's lead. In this way, under the watchful eyes of everyone, the 3 of them were surrounded by hundreds of soldiers of the army of the Dark Underworld and were taken away. Twilight City was the underground trading place of the immortal underworld and the underworld. Naturally, there was a need for people to maintain order. An army of the Dark Underworld was stationed here. It could be said that they had the final say in Twilight City. Naturally, the location where they were stationed was the best in the city. It was the largest stone building on the edge of the central square. The building was majestic, and the curved arched door was wide open. Song Yun Xian and the other two entered the city guard's mansion under the command of the soldier. Other people were isolated outside. The three of them were taken to the door of the prison behind the house and immediately stopped in surprise. Looking at the thick metal fence, it was obviously a prison cell for prisoners. Song Yun Xian said in a deep voice, "What is the meaning of this?" The soldier who led the way said with a blank expression, "Nothing. In order to prevent anyone from escaping, no matter who it is, they must be detained here before the interrogation." The black metal door opened. Song Yun Xian hesitated for a while, but he thought that as long as his hands and feet were not bound, the prison should not be able to stop his 3 swords in 1 sword drawing style in case of an accident. He immediately took the lead and walked in. Going down the steps of the prison door, they went deep into the large underground prison. Walking in the prison corridor illuminated by fluorescent stones, one side was a thick stone wall, and the other side was a single cell made of metal fences that were as thick as a child's arm. The gaps between the metal bars were relatively tight and there were also horizontal bars. At most, only a fist could reach through the bars. The entire cage was a metal cage. It was likely that the metal bars were not ordinary items, otherwise they would not be able to imprison a cultivator. The more the three walked, the more suspicious they became. The prison was empty and they did not see any other prisoners. After walking through a few more empty cells, Yu Qianqiu was about to ask, but the soldiers who were holding them down stopped first. One of them opened the prison door and shouted, "Go in." The three of them were stunned when they saw the people who were imprisoned in the next cell. It was none other than Mu Bing and the others. They saw Dong Laishun, who was sitting cross-legged, stood up, dragging the handcuffs and leg shackles. He smiled at them and said, "I thought we were the most unlucky ones. I didn't expect Song Yun Xian and you to be detained. Ah, we are really in the same boat." That's not right." Dong Laishun's gaze swept over the men's hands and feet, and he immediately roared at the soldiers outside, "Why aren't they wearing torture tools?" The others also abruptly stood up and angrily rebuked the injustice, and the prison immediately echoed with their voices. The soldiers were expressionless, and they could not be bothered to pay them any attention. Song Yun Xian snorted and did not say anything. Seeing that these people were also locked up, and their treatment was even worse, the three of them immediately dispelled their suspicions. Instead, they calmly walked into the cell. People were always like this. When they compared themselves, they would find their shortcomings, and when they compared themselves, they would find that they were quite good. Therefore, the most terrifying thing between people was to compare themselves with each other. Bang! After the soldier closed the door, he went to the next cell and opened it. He pointed at a person and said, "Go in order one by one. You come out first." The person who was pointed at walked out with a face full of indignation, and as soon as the door was closed, the soldier escorted him away. As the door to the dungeon disappeared with a clang, 2 cells separated by iron bars could be seen. On one side there were 3 people and on the other side there were 5 people staring at each other. The side with fewer people was free and idle, while the side with more people had torture tools on their bodies. It was a lot more miserable. Yu Qianqiu looked around and could not help but feel a little emotional. He did not know if it was fate with being in prison, but he could not remember how many times he had been in the palace in his previous life. Including this time in this life, it was already the 3rd time. The first time was in Ong Kwangsung's Spirit Stone Mine. The second time was in the prison of Lust City in the Eastern Holy Lands. The third time, which was also this time, was even more exaggerated. He actually came to the netherworld to be imprisoned. It was really like seeing a ghost. Could it be that he was born to be imprisoned? *T. Yu Qianqiu could not help but blurt out. It attracted everyone's attention, but no one understood what he was saying. When he turned around and saw everyone staring at him in confusion, Yu Qianqiu smiled and walked to the cell next door with his hands behind his back. He stared at Mu Bing, who was handcuffed and shackled, and said with a chuckle, "I say, Mu Bing, instead of being Great Commander Wu's father-in-law in the immortal world, you came here to be imprisoned. You really have a lot of fun." Mu Bing snorted coldly. "Don't try to be sharp-tongued or you'll be crying." Dong Laishun, who was at the side, immediately intervened between the two of them to be the peacemaker. He said, "Let's all talk less. Don't make a fuss at a time like this. If there's anything, let's talk when we get out." As he spoke, he tilted his head and secretly glared at Mu Bing. Mu Bing snorted coldly again and sat down cross-legged. He closed his eyes and did not speak, as if he did not care about what was happening outside. Yu Qian chuckled in a melancholy manner and wandered around the small space in a leisurely manner. After a while, another 2 soldiers came and opened the cell next door again. One of them pointed at Mu Bing, who was sitting cross-legged, and shouted, "You, come out." Mu Bing stood up expressionlessly and walked out of the cell door, following the 2 soldiers. Just like this, every once in a while, a prisoner would be taken out of the cell next door. It was only when Dong Lai Shun cupped his hands at his cellmate and was taken away that the cell next door was completely empty. The 3 of them looked at each other. Needless to say, if they guessed correctly, it should be their turn next. As expected, not long after, 2 soldiers came and opened the cell door. One of the soldiers pointed at Xinyu and said, "You, come out." Xinyu was instantly a little frightened. Yu Qianqiu patted his shoulder and smiled. "Don't be nervous, I have experience in this. You will get used to it after a few times." It's okay, you are from the River Styx's water tribe. They won't dare to do anything to you." Xinyu thought about it and went out obediently. After leaving the dungeon, he was immediately escorted to the main hall in the front yard. The spacious hall was simple and solemn. There were 4 soldiers holding swords standing on both sides, and the general with the surname Lu was sitting behind a stone table at the front. Xinyu stood in the hall, trembling. As he was thinking about what the other party would ask and how he should answer, he saw General Lu looking at him coldly and saying, "You are from the River Styx's water tribe. This has nothing to do with you. You can leave now." Xinyu was stunned. He did not expect that General Lu would let him go without even asking him a question. Before he could regain his senses, a soldier in the hall shouted, "What are you waiting for? Hurry up and leave. Do you want to stay and be punished?" Xinyu did not dare to stay any longer. He immediately bowed and hurriedly walked out of the city guard's mansion. Chapter 1037. Many people gathered outside the city guard's mansion to watch the show. No one knew why the Onyx army was going through so much trouble. When they saw that Jiyu was the first to come out, they were surprised but felt that it was reasonable. After all, he was from the River Styx's water tribe. The Onyx army would not dare to touch him. Otherwise they would be breaking the ancient rule. By then, even Madame Blackpool would not be able to protect them. The Heartless Palace elder in charge here was He Jinquang. When he saw Jiyu come out, he immediately went over and cupped his hands at Jiyu. "I am He Jinquang, the Heartless Palace elder. Song Yun Xian, who went in with you, is the chief high priest of our sect. We are from the same sect. May I know your name?" "River Styx's water tribe, Jiyu." Jiyu replied politely. "So it's Mr. Ji." He Jinquang cupped his hands and asked politely, "You all went in together, but Mr. Ji was the first to come out. Can you tell me what happened inside? Is our high priest safe and sound?" "He's temporarily imprisoned inside. He's fine for now," Jiyu suddenly exclaimed. He looked around and did not see Mu Bing and the others. He asked suspiciously, "You said I'm the first to come out?" "That's right. Is there a problem?" He Jinquang did not dare to be careless. If anything happened to Song Yun Xian here, he would not be able to escape responsibility. The dark and skinny Jiyu frowned. "Before I came out, there were already 6 people who came out to be interrogated. Did none of them come out? Why didn't I see them go back? Where did they go?" He Jinquang smiled worriedly. "The city guard's mansion is so big. They should be somewhere else for now. It's probably because you're from the River Styx's water tribe, so they don't dare to do anything to you. That's why they let you out first." Jiyu's frown eased and he nodded slightly. He felt that was the case. In the dungeon, 2 soldiers came again. They opened the cell door and pointed at Song Yun Xian. "It's your turn. Come out." Just as Grey Cloud Xian walked to the door, he paused and looked at Yu Qianqiu, who was alone in the cell. He frowned and said, "Why do you have to go back and forth so troublesome? Just call him and we'll go out together." What he was worried about now was what would happen if someone tried to kill Yu Qianqiu while he was away. It was not that he treasured Yu Qianqiu's life, but if Yu Qianqiu died, his own life would come to an end. The soldier immediately shouted, "Of course there are rules for interrogation. How can we give you a chance to collude on the spot? We have to interrogate you one by one. Don't dawdle, go quickly." Song Yunxin thought about it and agreed, but he was still worried about Yu Qianqiu's safety. Yu Qianqiu walked to the door with a smile and said, "Old Song, you go first. I have some relationship with Lady Blackpool, so I don't think these little pawns would dare to do anything to me." As soon as he said that, the 2 soldiers looked at each other in surprise. Grey Cloud Xian was also slightly startled. He looked at Yu Qianqiu in confusion. He didn't know when Yu Qianqiu had gotten involved with Madame Blackpool. Even so, he still released his divine sense to scan the entire dungeon. After confirming that there was no one else, He left with the two soldiers with a little relief. After leaving the dungeon, he was sent to the main hall in the front room just like Xinyu. One of the soldiers who escorted him quickly walked to the side of the general who was sitting calmly in the hall. He lowered his head slightly, obviously transmitting his voice to the general. General Lu was taken aback for a moment, then he sneered and said, "What a joke. Madam is of high status and power. How could she have any relationship with him? Don't pay attention to his nonsense." The soldier seemed to want to say something, but he eventually shut his mouth and retreated. Song Yunxin, who was standing in the hall, had already guessed that they were talking about Yu Qianqiu. In fact, he did not take Yu Qianqiu's words seriously. Just think about it, he had never seen Lady Blackpool or heard that she had been to the immortal realm before. On the other hand, it was clearly Yu Qianqiu's first time in the netherworld realm. How could he have any relationship with Lady Blackpool? If he really had such a great reputation, he would not have ended up like this. Suddenly, Song Yunxin stared at the person sitting high in the hall and said in a deep voice, "Ask anything, I will tell you everything I know." General Lu nodded slightly, then tilted his head and said, "Call He Jinquang of Heartless Palace in." One of his subordinates immediately ran out. Song Yunxin looked at the hall in confusion. Not long after, He Jinquang followed his subordinate into the hall. He gave Song Yunxin a once-over and heaved a sigh of relief when he saw that he was unharmed. He cupped his fists and said, "Greetings, High Deacon." He then cupped his fists and said, "General Lu, may I know what you have summoned me for?" General Lu was still wearing his armor. He sat behind the stone table in a dignified manner. After staring at the two of them for a while, he casually picked up a jade archive from the table and looked at it. After a long while, he put it down and looked at the people below. He asked, "He Jinquang, are you certain that he is the chief high deacon of your heartless palace, Song Yunxin?" Song Yunxin's gaze turned cold. He thought that General Lu was up to something again. He Jinquang quickly replied, "General Lu, what do you mean by that? If he isn't my sect's high deacon, I wouldn't have needed to step forward. That makes things easier. I'll take it that your heartless palace is vouching for him." General Lu placed his arms on the table and stared at the people below. He said indifferently, "Since you're the one who vouched for him, I won't ask any more questions. However, I'll be frank. If I find out that he has anything to do with the matter I'm investigating, don't blame me for being rude to your heartless palace." He Jinquang stole a glance at Song Yunxin. He didn't know what was going on around him, nor did he know if it had anything to do with Song Yunxin. He couldn't make up his mind if he wanted to use the lives of everyone from Heartless Palace in the underworld as collateral. He needed someone more experienced to make the decision. Truth be told, Song Yunxin himself didn't even know what was going on around him. He was caught in a daze. However, there was one thing he could guarantee. Whatever happened around him had nothing to do with him. He sneered, "You don't have to threaten me. I didn't do anything around here on my way here." Since the High Deacon had said that, He Jinquang wouldn't be blamed if anything happened. He nodded and said, "My Heartless Palace is willing to vouch for High Deacon." "That's great." General Lu waved his hand and said, "Since I've vouched for him, you can leave now." The matter was easily resolved. He Jinquang cupped his hands to express his gratitude. Then he turned to Song Yunxin and extended his hand toward the door. "High Deacon, please." "No hurry." Song Yunxin pressed his hand down and stared at the door. He said in a deep voice, "Yu Qianqiu traveled with me. I can guarantee that he didn't do anything around here. Please let him go. The innocent are innocent and the guilty are innocent. I have to follow all the necessary procedures. Otherwise, wouldn't I be suspected of corruption? I will treat High Deacon Song's words as testimony. If there's nothing wrong, I will naturally let him go. Please don't interfere with my interrogation." General Lu extended his hand toward the door and said, "I won't see you out." Song Yunxin's eyes turned cold. He wanted to stay and wait for Yu Qianqiu to come out. However, a bitter expression flashed across He Jinquang's face. How could the upper echelons of the sect know the difficulties of the subordinates outside? The Dark Nether Army had already given him enough face by making concessions. If he continued to contradict them, his days here would be difficult. After all, this was their territory. The Dark Nether Army would definitely make things difficult for him. If he couldn't handle the matters here well, he wouldn't be able to explain to the sect. He coughed and cupped his hands toward Song Yunxin. "High Deacon, we might as well wait outside the door." Song Yunxin was slightly startled. He was also someone who often worked outside. He was not ignorant of the difficulties of the subordinates like He Jinquang thought. After thinking about it, there shouldn't be any problems. He glanced at General Liu who was sitting high above, then turned and strode out. He Jinquang breathed a sigh of relief, cupped his hands again and quickly followed. As soon as they left the city guard mansion, they saw a group of people watching the show. Xinyu, who was in the crowd, hurriedly walked over to Zhang Yunxin and asked, "How is Yu Qianqiu?" In fact, as soon as Zhang Yunxin was escorted out of the dungeon, Mu Bing and the others, led by Dong Lai Shun, came out of a house not far away. The shackles on their hands and feet were long gone. The two soldiers accompanying them quickly gestured for the guards to open the cell door. The group quickly entered the dungeon. Inside the cell, Yu Qianqiu was bored alone. He paced around the small space with his hands behind his back, his head lowered and his brows furrowed as he thought about some problems. He wasn't worried about any accidents at all. With his ability, this cell could trap other cultivators, but it was useless against him. He could leave at any time and it was no different from a piece of paper. Clang. The sound of the cell door opening pulled him back from his thoughts. It was probably time for him to go to court. However, he heard footsteps along the way. It wasn't like before where there were only 2 soldiers. There seemed to be 7 or 8 people. While he was pondering, the 7 or 8 people had already arrived in front of the cell. They were all familiar faces and they were all sneering at him. They looked at him as if he was a pig that was about to be slaughtered. Mu Bing, who was in the crowd, laughed evilly and said, "Yu Qianqiu, I told you that no matter how sharp-tongued you are, there will be a time when you cry. Even in your dreams, you probably never imagined that this moment would come so quickly." Yu Qianqiu was slightly stunned. He saw that the shackles on their hands and feet were gone, and that the 2 soldiers were fighting on the side. With his experience in this area, he immediately guessed the cause and effect. He knew that he had fallen into a trap. The corner of his mouth curled up slightly and he said, "It is indeed a good plan. Step by step, you paralyzed us and successfully made us lower our guard. Finally, as you wished, Zhang Yunxin was lured away." His gaze then fell on Mu Bing and he sneered with unusual disdain, "Mu Bing, it's not that I look down on you, but with that pig brain of yours and that little bit of knowledge of yours, you can't come up with such an overt scheme. So, what the F***ck are you so proud of?" Chapter 1038. These words were a resounding slap to the face. Every word was like a sharp blade stabbing into his heart. This was because this method was indeed not thought of by him. His words were like a sharp blade, stabbing into the pit of his heart. He could not pull it out even if he wanted to. Thus his face turned green. He simply had no reason to refute Yu Qianqiu. He could only gnash his teeth and speak with a sinister expression. "Yu Qianqiu, I'll let you know what it means to be unable to live or die." "Beg for death?" Yu Qianqiu sneered. "Don't worry, no matter who I beg for, it won't come to you." He raised his hand and pinched his little finger. "Who in the 3 realms doesn't know that you're a bastard who sells his daughter for glory? Poor Mu Qinjiao traded her body for this vanity, but you don't cherish it. You even want to show it off. Are you afraid that others don't know how shameless you are? Why don't you think about it? With your little ability, how could you find so many people to help you?" Previously he was still worried about Wu Xiong's face and didn't want to scold the couple. But now that things had come to this, the dagger was revealed. The other party had already made it clear that they wanted to take his little life. Even if he showed mercy, it wouldn't be worth a fart. Now it was either you die or I live. There was no way out. "Capture him alive. Capture him alive. I want to kill him with my own hands." Mu Bing roared as he pointed at the cell. He really couldn't find words more vicious than Yu Qianqiu's to scold Yu Qianqiu. The others looked at him with a hint of pity. "Since you know he has a sharp tongue, why do you keep jumping out to provoke him? Today I want to see who will kill who." Yu Qianqiu sneered. There was no wind in the cell, but his clothes suddenly fluttered. Boundless killing intent instantly exploded. "Do you want to fight like a cornered beast? You overestimate yourself." Dong Shunlai maintained his smile, but his hands suddenly elongated and shot out like 2 thin bamboo poles. With a whoosh, they passed through the cage and the 2 palms at the front suddenly turned into 2 sharp claws. One clawed at Yu Qianqiu's head, and the other clawed at Yu Qianqiu's chest. He wanted to kill Yu Qianqiu in one strike. He did not care whether Mu Bing wanted to capture him alive or not. He wanted to settle the matter first, otherwise there would be trouble. It wasn't easy to trick Grey Cloud Xian into leaving, and they couldn't afford to waste too much time. If they waited for Grey Cloud Xian to react and rush over, and they still hadn't left, then none of them would be able to leave. The Heartless Palace's 3-in-1 sword drawing style was no joke. The sneak attack of an expert at the initial stage of the Netherworld Emperor was so fast that Yu Qianqiu couldn't dodge it. However, his opponents outnumbered him and all of them were highly skilled swordsmen. How could he not be prepared when facing them alone? Thousands of purple flame high-energy sabers had been secretly arranged around his body under the cover of the explosive murderous aura. Kill? Yu Qianqiu yelled fiercely. Thousands of invisible purple flame high-energy sabers spun and attacked at the same time. Puff puff. A series of tearing sounds could be heard. The two pairs of ghostly claws that were as fast as lightning were shredded into thousands of pieces, falling to the ground and turning into wisps of gray smoke. Ugh. Dong Shunlai let out a muffled groan. The pair of ghostly claws that had been shredded quickly retracted, and grew back at a visible speed. His eyes were filled with disbelief as he glanced around the prison. His pair of ghostly claws were extremely sharp and hard. How could they be destroyed by ordinary objects? He could clearly feel that the prison was filled with sharp objects of extreme yang, which were simply his natural nemesis. Not only him but the others were also startled. They didn't expect that Dong Shunlai, who was at the initial stage of the Netherworld Emperor, would suffer a great loss in just one round. When the 1,000 purple flame high-energy sabers were brandished, the terrifying energy surged forward, making the ghosts and monsters of the underworld tremble with fear. Since he had already attacked, Yu Qianqiu wouldn't show any mercy based on his personality. His 5 fingers stretched out like claws toward the outside of the prison, and he yelled fiercely again, "Kill!" Thousands of purple flame high-energy sabers shot out like a rain of swords from the metal bars. However, the surprise effect had already disappeared. Dong Shunlai's new pair of ghostly claws quickly pushed out, and a black translucent wall of light immediately blocked in front of him. Immediately, the outline of the flying daggers appeared on the wall of light, and it began to protrude forward. Dong Shunlai resisted the rainstorm-like purple flame high-energy sabers with his powerful cultivation. However, the black transparent wall of light was gradually being broken through. Dong Shunlai said hurriedly, "This kid's item is the nemesis of my meditation cultivation. I can't hold on much longer. You guys should kill him while I'm blocking his treasure." He still thought that Yu Qianqiu had used some kind of treasure. The dumbfounded crowd immediately came back to their senses. Mu Bing was terrified. He didn't expect Yu Qianqiu to be so powerful that even an expert in the preliminary stage of the Netherworld Emperor realm couldn't hold on much longer. Mu Bing was slowly moving to one side, showing signs of fleeing. However, Yu Qianqiu's trump cards came one after the other. It was fine if he didn't reveal them, but once he revealed them, they were all extraordinary. How could an ordinary expert block them? If he didn't have a trump card, he wouldn't have dared to run around. Now that he had been attacked, he couldn't pretend to be a coward anymore. If he still showed mercy, he would be a pig unless he didn't want to live anymore. For a moment, Yu Qianqiu didn't conceal his murderous intent at all. Seeing his opponents about to gang up on him, and Mu Bing showing signs of fleeing, Yu Qianqiu's eyes widened. How could he let Mu Bing run away? Kill! With the third roar, Yu Qianqiu pushed out his palms fiercely, as if he wanted to rush out of the cage. His whole body emitted a dazzling purple light, and thousands of flying swords of purple flames shot out from his body, covering the entire area and attacking indiscriminately. Within such a short distance, the metal fence in front of Yu Qianqiu was instantly smashed into pieces by the sharp flying swords of purple flames. What were these things? The crowd turned pale with fright. They didn't expect these flying swords to be so sharp. They had thought that after they trapped Yu Qianqiu in the dungeon, Yu Qianqiu was no different from a lamb waiting to be slaughtered. However, they found out that the narrow space also limited their chances of escaping. The swarming purple flying swords closed in on a large area like a bowl cover. It was obvious that his opponent wanted to kill them all at once. The only place he could escape to was the wall behind him. The black wall of light that blocked the purple flame high-energy blade couldn't stop the indiscriminate bombardment of the flying swords of purple flames, and was instantly smashed to pieces. Dong Shunlai could no longer laugh and his face was full of shock. He didn't know that if he was a cultivator from the immortal world, he might be able to block it with his profound cultivation. However, these flying swords of pure yang were the bane of meditation cultivators, and it was very difficult for him to block them with his current cultivation. There was a loud boom behind him as the other meditation cultivators worked together to blast a large hole in the wall. It was a few hundred meters deep, and the plaza outside collapsed as a large hole appeared. Almost at the same time that the hole appeared, Yu Qianqiu spread his fingers and used the earth's secret art. The hole collapsed with a boom, almost burying those who wanted to enter it alive. Yu Qianqiu had clearly gone berserk. He wanted to trap everyone with a mere minor immortal cultivation and fight so many experts by himself. A miserable scream came from the other side. Mu Bing's cultivation was low, and he didn't have time to dodge at such a close distance. Several flying swords pierced through his intestines and he fell to the ground. "Help!" he cried out, but no one had the time to care about him. The ground wriggled and swallowed him whole. Everything seemed to have happened slowly, but in fact, everything happened very quickly. It happened in the blink of an eye. Die. Dong Shunlai roared, and his tyrannical cultivation erupted on the spot. Fierce astral energy instantly swept toward the flying swords of purple flames. He punched out with both fists, and a solid astral energy shot toward Yu Qianqiu. Immediately, the weakness of Yu Qianqiu's low cultivation was exposed. If the flying swords of purple flames had been used by an immortal emperor, they would have died for sure. However, Yu Qianqiu's cultivation was far too low compared to theirs. The fierce chaotic wind disturbed the flying swords on the spot, especially the chaotic wind formed by his fists with the cultivation of the early stage of the underworld emperor. The chaotic wind blasted the flying swords of the purple flames away in all directions. The cultivation of the early stage of the netherworld emperor realm was not child's play. Once it was displayed, the earth shook and the mountains shook. The entire dungeon collapsed in an instant, and for a moment the earth and rocks became a blur, and the sound of rumbling could be heard. At the place where the two fists landed, the metal fences were directly broken, and the wall behind them was instantly blasted away by the unparalleled power. On the ground outside, in a straight line of 1,000 meters, all the houses made of boulders were blown into the sky by the tremendous force. A deep trench appeared on the ground. Then countless rocks and stones fell from the sky like rain. People were fleeing in all directions. Those with low cultivation bases were not able to dodge in time. They were directly smashed into meat paste by the aftershock of the two fists that came out from the ground. A golden light suddenly appeared and wrapped around Yu Qianqiu, but he was still blasted into the hole behind him like a meteor by the heavy fists. Capture him and use him as a hostage. Dong Shunlai waved his hand, sweeping away the falling rocks and soil, creating a short gap. He snorted coldly and dashed towards the hole he had created in the ground, chasing after them. When the others saw that the purple flame flying sword wasn't unstoppable, their confidence was boosted, and they almost followed suit. The 7 of them chased after Yu Qianqiu. In the blink of an eye, the people who were watching the commotion outside the city guard's mansion were startled by a loud noise. A large hole suddenly appeared in the square behind them, and rocks and stones flew everywhere like rain. Most of the people immediately hid in the air. Waiting outside the door, Songyun Xen wasn't a fool. He realized that he had fallen into a trap after thinking for a while. It seemed that someone had made a move in the dungeon. Bang! Songyun Xen was extremely angry, and his thunderous roar shook the minds of the onlookers in the sky. Shen Yu and He Jingquang, who were next to him, took a few steps back. Blood even seeped out of their mouths and noses, and their faces instantly turned pale. As soon as Songyun Xen dodged into the sky, he heard another loud boom behind the dungeon. 100-meter deep, 1,000-meter-long trench suddenly appeared. The houses that were built on top of the trench were instantly blown into the sky, and the onlookers dodged in all directions, screaming miserably. Chapter 1039. Songyun Xian's expression changed drastically. With his eyesight, he could immediately tell that this was the aftershock of an expert's attack. The attacker was at least an early-stage immortal emperor. Apart from General Liu, only Dong Lai Shun had such a cultivation. General Liu, who was sitting in the main hall of the city guard's mansion waiting for news, was similarly shocked when he felt the violent tremor. He got up and smashed the stone table in front of him. He looked at his men standing below and said in a low voice, "What's going on? Why did you cause such a huge commotion just to deal with an early-stage minor immortal cultivator? Are you afraid that Songyun Xen won't know?" Flustered and exasperated, he disappeared from the main hall in a flash. As soon as he appeared in the air, he saw Songyun Xen glaring at him angrily. Fortunately, Songyun Xen wasn't in the mood to deal with him. Saving Yu Qianqiu was his top priority, so he shot away in a flash. Golden umbrella. Dong Shunlai, who had chased into the cave, cried out. A large golden umbrella lay on its side on the ground. Yu Qianqiu was lying on the ground, hugging the handle of the umbrella and coughing. He coughed and coughed, mouthful after mouthful of blood. His entire body was enveloped by the faint golden light emitted by the golden umbrella. Although he looked heavily injured, there wasn't a single wound on his body. Golden umbrella. The people who chased after him also cried out. Although they hadn't seen the golden umbrella before, they had heard of it. It was one of the few defensive magic treasures in the immortal world. The shape of the umbrella was so obvious that anyone with a bit of experience would be able to tell that it was a golden umbrella. It's too late. Count himself lucky. Let's go. Dong Shunlai called out. They quickly shot towards the hole in the ground tens of meters away. They knew that they wouldn't be able to break the golden umbrella in a short time. If this dragged on, none of them would be able to escape from Cangyun Xian. However, Dong Shunlai didn't give up. As he shot up, he threw a heavy punch at the golden umbrella below. *CK. Yu Qianqiu, who was inside the golden umbrella, let out a strange cry. He had overestimated the power of the golden umbrella, thinking that he would be fine as long as he hid inside it. He didn't expect that the cultivation base of the early stage of the underworld emperor realm was too frightening. Even though it didn't break through the defense of the golden umbrella, Yu Qianqiu was shaken badly. If he were to be hit again, Yu Qianqiu really suspected that he would be jolted to death. How could he dare to take it head-on? Almost at the same time the heavy punch landed, he hid back into Utopia with his umbrella. Boom. The entire Twilight City shook violently. Almost at the same time, a huge hole appeared in the ground. Dong Shunlai didn't even bother to check if he had hit him. Just as he was about to escape into the sky, a mournful cry suddenly erupted from the large hole that had been blasted open. Cangyun Xian, *CK your ancestors, they want to run, stop them for your father, don't let a single one of them escape. Although the voice came from underground, the hysterical anger had faintly penetrated the ground. Everyone outside could hear it clearly. Everyone could tell that it was a roar with all his strength. He really isn't dead. Dong Shunlai's expression twitched. He wanted to turn back and beat him up a few more times, but there was no time. If he didn't escape now, when would he? Cangyun Xian, who was rushing over, immediately understood what it meant when he heard, they want to run. He wasn't angry at all about *King his ancestors. When he heard that Yu Qianqiu was cursing with such vigor, his spirit was lifted. That guy was obviously still alive and didn't have time to listen to what he said next. As his eyes flashed, he immediately saw 7 streams of light shooting out from the ravine hundreds of meters away. They scattered in a fan shape and fled. It was a smart idea. It all depended on who was unlucky or lucky. Bang. Cangyun Xian's roar resounded through the world. He wanted to catch 7 people who were running away. He wasn't sure if he could, but he was sure that he could kill 7 dead people. Clang. A soft sound reverberated through the world. Even the air between heaven and earth trembled slightly. A dazzling white light came out from his sleeve and instantly illuminated the entire Twilight City. The people who were used to the darkness found it difficult to adapt to such a dazzling light. They subconsciously raised their sleeves to cover their faces or closed their eyes. They could only hear the roaring wind in their ears. Those who were close to the light were instantly swept away by the strong airflow. Dong Shunlai and the others who were scattering in all directions only saw a vast expanse of whiteness. They immediately sensed a powerful aura that blotted out the sky and covered the earth behind them. Looking back in fear, they saw a powerful beam of light sweeping towards them at an unbelievable speed. The aura that assaulted their faces was suffocating and forcefully poured into their lungs. They couldn't even block it. The 7 of them were scared out of their wits. Almost subconsciously, they used all of their cultivation to form a protective aura shield. However, the protective aura shield was easily destroyed like an eggshell. The 7 of them spat out a mouthful of blood and were instantly swallowed by the strong light that swept across. The 7 screams were swallowed as soon as they sounded. Many people who were watching from behind did not have time to escape. Suddenly, shrill screams rang out, but they were swallowed in the blink of an eye. Rumble. The earth trembled as if the sky and earth were about to be turned upside down. When the strong light disappeared, the world returned to calm. The people who were hiding in the air slowly opened their eyes, and suddenly became dumbfounded. Half of Twilight City, which covered an area of dozens of miles, had collapsed, starting from near the central square. Especially in the direction where Cangyun Xian was facing. 1/3 of the city walls that were spread out in a fan shape were instantly smashed into powder. Not even a complete stone could be seen. On both sides of the fan shape were large collapsed houses. Dozens of mountains dozens of miles away had been razed to the ground. Smoke filled the air for a long time. Sang Yunshin floated silently in the air, silently adjusting his aura. Pulling out the sword had consumed a lot of his cultivation base. He stared coldly in front of him, his right hand holding the sword horizontally in a slanted manner. This sword was not like an ordinary flying sword. The blade was longer and wider and the temperature seemed to be very high. It was enshrouded in a dense white mist that curled up and dissipated. Finally, the blade slowly turned from white to clear, like a pool of autumn water. At a glance, one could tell that it was not an ordinary sword. Otherwise, it would not have been able to withstand such a powerful force. Could this be the Heartless Palace's 3 swords and 1 sword draw style? Some whispers sounded, and countless horrified eyes looked at Sang Yunexen. They were filled with disbelief. They could not imagine that the power of one person could burst out such a powerful force. Looking at the dust-filled area in front of him, there was not a single figure to be seen. From the miserable cries earlier, it was obvious that besides the 7 people who had fled, there were countless others who had been annihilated by this sword strike. In fact, Sang Yunexen did not want to kill innocent people, but after the power of that sword was released, he could not control the killing range. He would not stop until the power was completely exhausted. Xinyu was dumbfounded. He did not expect to have such a powerful master by his side these days. This was the sect's 3 swords and 1 sword draw style. He Jinquang could not suppress the excitement on his face. He had long heard that the sect leader Wang Qing's 3 swords and 1 sword draw style was extraordinary, but he had never had the chance to see it for himself. It turned out that its power was so terrifying. General Liu looked at Sang Yunexen with a gloomy expression. He could not suppress the chill in his heart. Although his armored subordinates were flying behind him, he knew that no matter how many of them there were, they would not be able to block that sword. In the cave below, Yu Qianqiu had just flashed out of the deep pit when he heard a thunderous roar of slaughter pushing into the distance. Even the ground was violently trembling, and the commotion was extremely frightening. When the commotion completely disappeared, he discovered that more than half of his body had been buried by the collapsed soil. He quickly flashed out, rubbed his chest and coughed out another mouthful of blood. He spread his arms, and the scattered purple flame-flying swords all drilled out of the soil and returned to his body. Then he looked around and quickly sank into the ground, entering a spherical space a few hundred meters underground. He saw Mu Bing lying on the ground, applying medicine on the wound on his stomach. He was still moaning in pain. "Mu Bing, I'm so happy to see you again." Yu Qianqiu took a step forward, raised his foot, and directly stepped on Mu Bing's stomach, which was covered with both hands. Mu Bing's 10 fingers as well as the medicine bottle were stomped into the cracked belly. Blood immediately spurted out of the slightly healed wound. Ah! The miserable scream was shrill and piercing, making one's hair stand on end. Yu Qianqiu was not moved at all. He forcefully twisted his foot again until both of Mu Bing's palms were completely stuffed into his cracked belly. Then he sneered and said, "Didn't you say that there would be a time for me to cry? I'm waiting for you to explode your dantian." Mu Bing was in so much pain that he could not catch his breath. How could he have the guts to destroy his body and soul? He looked at Yu Qianqiu in horror, gasping for breath, and said, "Yu Qian, spare me as long as you let me go. I'll do anything in the future. With Wu Xiong's help, no one in the immortal world will dare to touch you. Who does Wu Xiong think he is?" Yu Qianqiu laughed coldly. His right hand pulled out a long sword made of azure fire. He waved the tip of the sword in front of Mu Bing's eyes and said, "Tell me the truth. Why did you come to the netherworld this time?" He still thought that Mu Bing was hiding some secret, but at this time, how could Mu Bing still dare to say that he was here to kill him? But in this moment of hesitation, Yu Qianqiu swung the long sword in his hand and chopped off both of Mu Bing's legs, starting from the ankles. Mu Bing's forehead was instantly covered in sweat. His body twisted slightly, and the blood in his abdomen flowed even faster. "Still talking back to me?" Yu Qianqiu sneered and swung the long sword in his hand again, chopping off 2 more legs from the knees. "Ah!" Mu Bing screamed and replied impatiently, "Kill you, hunt you down. I came to hunt you down." "Hunt me down? You think you can find so many netherworld experts to hunt me down?" Yu Qianqiu moved the sword in his hand and the tip hovered over Mu Bing's eyes. He said indifferently, "Without Wu Xiong's support, you wouldn't have been able to find so many netherworld experts to help you. Wu Xiong wouldn't go against the immortal emperor just to kill me, right? If you don't tell me the truth, I'll gouge out one of your eyeballs. Do you believe me?" Chapter 1040. Mu Bing's pupils shrank as the blade swayed slightly in front of his eyes. He had no doubt that Yu Qianqiu was joking. If he was unhappy, Yu Qianqiu's sword would gouge out one of his eyeballs. He hurriedly said, "I deliberately told Wu Xiong that you had once pursued Tianjiao, and that the relationship between the two of you had always been ambiguous. This aroused Wu Xiong's jealousy and made him use his power to help me kill you." Yu Qianqiu choked and was speechless. Let's not talk about whether or not he had an ambiguous relationship with Mu Tianjiao. Even if he did, was this something that a father could say? Not to mention that he didn't. He really couldn't imagine that a father would slander his own daughter's reputation like this. Not to mention him, even the dead Dong Shunlai would never have thought that the problem he couldn't figure out before was actually caused by Wu Xiong's jealousy. It should be known that sometimes, no matter how shrewd a man was, he couldn't stand his woman having an ambiguous relationship with another man. Because of this, he would often do something impulsive that he would regret. So that's how it is. Yu Qianqiu shook his head slightly. He didn't think that Mu Bing was lying. He slowly let out a breath and said, I give up. You're even slandering your own daughter. Let me ask you, does Mu Qinjiao know that you came to kill me? No. Wu Xiong and I hid it from her. If she knew, she definitely wouldn't agree, Mu Bing replied hurriedly. Mu Bing replied hurriedly. He blurted it out without thinking, fearing that he would be killed if he didn't answer in time. Hearing this, Yu Qianqiu finally felt a little better. Fortunately, he didn't misjudge Mu Tianjiao. It should be known that in his eyes, Mu Tianjiao had always been a woman who was not inferior to men. She wouldn't be so narrow-minded. It would be really disgusting if he met a family of ingrates. The sword in his hand moved away from Mu Bing's eyeballs. He patted Mu Bing's face with the blade and said, I just can't figure it out. How did I offend you? How could you be so vengeful? Even though I'm in the underworld, you still chase after me at all costs. What? Hee hee. Mu Bing suddenly laughed miserably. He laughed so hard that he spat out a mouthful of blood. He said in a hoarse voice, although I'm incompetent, how can I not see through my daughter's thoughts after raising her for so many years? Who in the world knows her better than I do? Back then, when the two of you left the Divine Ruin Realm, I could tell that Tianjiao had fallen in love with you. If the two of you were a couple, it would be fine. But now she is married to Wu Xiong. Who is Wu Xiong? He was someone who could be considered powerful even in the Immortal Palace. It was one thing for the last to go to the World Chamber of Commerce to support you, but she even invited you to the wedding. What kind of occasion was that? It's too obvious. I'm scared. I'm afraid that the lass will do something impulsive and ruin her hard-won happiness. Yu Qianqiu was stunned. He somewhat understood. No wonder this old dog deliberately humiliated him at Mu Tianjiao's wedding. So this was the reason. The sword patted his face again and said, but you don't have to tarnish your own daughter's reputation. Aren't you afraid that Wu Xiong's misunderstanding will deepen and ruin your daughter's happiness? As long as you're dead, the lass will stop thinking. I believe that the lass will have a good relationship with Wu Xiong, because the lass's chastity is the best bargaining chip. Mu Bing suddenly roared with a ferocious expression. And the most important point is that I can't stand the sight of you. I, Mu Bing, have suffered for so many years in the immortal world before I could make a name for myself. Why is it that you, a poor boy with nothing, can live better than me? It would be fine if you had a good birth and a good background. But you were just a subordinate of my 4 links Chamber of Commerce. Damn it. I'm afraid that what you said before was just an excuse to comfort yourself. It's true that you're jealous of me. You dog, who do you think you are to compare yourself with me? Who asked you to be so arrogant? Mu Bing's right eyeball flew out with a flick of the sword in his hand. Who asked you to look down on me? The sword in his hand flicked again and Mu Bing's left eyeball popped out again. Yu Qianqiu. Before Mu Bing could finish roaring in pain, Yu Qianqiu stabbed his sword into his mouth and chewed his tongue. He sneered and said, who asked you to shout at me? Mu Bing's head tilted and he fainted from the pain. Just as Yu Qianqiu pulled out his sword, he suddenly heard someone shouting, Yu Qianqiu, where are you? He couldn't help but be stunned. He thought that it was Mu Bing, whose tongue had been chewed up, who was talking. After listening carefully, he realized that it was Ash Gray Cloud Xian's voice. He immediately looked up and muttered, this old man has such a good voice. I can still hear him even though I'm hiding so deep underground. With a swing of the sword in his hand, he chopped off the head of the unconscious Mu Bing. Then he put away the blue fire flying sword and bent down to grab the bun on Mu Bing's head. Then he quickly burrowed into the soil above his head. Ash Gray Cloud Xian, who had already burrowed into the half-collapsed underground cave, shouted frantically. He was cleaning up the collapsed area while searching for Yu Qianqiu. He had clearly heard Yu Qianqiu's scolding voice earlier, so why wasn't there any reaction now? If Yu Qianqiu died, he would have to prepare to hide in the netherworld and escape for his life. He wouldn't be able to return to the immortal realm for the rest of his life. Not only would he have to pay back the Passionless Palace, he would also have to face the constant pursuit. How he wished that Yu Qianqiu would scold him again. It didn't matter how vicious the scolding was as long as he wasn't dead. Suddenly, ash-gray Cloud Xian's sharp divine sense detected some movement in the collapsed area in front of him. He was delighted to see Yu Qianqiu bursting out from the ground, holding a bloody head in his hand. It was Mu Bing's. Ash-gray Cloud Xian quickly suppressed the pleasant surprise on his face and said with a cold expression, "Did you kill Mu Bing?" However, he was astonished inwardly. Even after being attacked by several meditation practitioners, including a Netherworld Emperor at the preliminary stage, they still couldn't kill him. It was a miracle that this guy was still alive. Half of Yu Qianqiu's body was covered in blood. He shook the head in his hand and said with a cold smile, "Do you think he came for me? You are very wrong. I have just interrogated him. The person he wanted to kill is indeed me, but it was Wu Xiong who played tricks behind the scenes. The real target is your Heartless Palace. I don't know how your Heartless Palace offended Wu Xiong. Damn it, he wanted to kill me to use the powerful force of the Immortal Palace to eradicate your Heartless Palace. I'm so unlucky. If I knew this would happen, I wouldn't have asked the Heartless Palace to protect me. Don't talk nonsense here. Do you think I will believe your provocation?" Ash-gray Cloud Xian was shocked, but he still said coldly, "It is you who offended Mu Bing. Mu Bing is here for revenge. Touch your conscience when you say this." Yu Qianqiu patted his chest and lifted Mu Bing's head. He sneered, "Let's not talk about the others. Do you think he can find an early-stage underworld emperor to help him? In fact, you know that Wu Xiong is behind this. Without Wu Xiong's support, it is still a question whether he can come to Twilight City." Ash-gray Cloud Xian didn't care. "You have the Immortal Emperor's decree on you. Wu Xiong doesn't have the guts to oppose the Immortal Emperor." "That's right. Although Mu Bing has confessed, I don't understand what you said. Wu Xiong is a member of the Immortal Palace. Why would he take the lead to oppose the Immortal Emperor? Could it be that he was tired of living? I don't get it. Yu Qianqiu shook his head. Suddenly, he was startled and revealed a suspicious expression. "I say, old Ash-gray, do you think the Immortal Palace doesn't want your Heartless Palace to grow, so they sent me here to compose a song? In reality, it was all planned. They just wanted to sacrifice me to find an excuse to take care of the Heartless Palace in the open." Ash-gray Cloud Xian couldn't hide the shock in his eyes. He even suspected that the Immortal Palace was aware of Sect Master Wang Qing's secret, so they planned this. However, he thought of a suspicious point and calmed down in the blink of an eye. He snorted, "Don't try to sow discord here. You were the one who wanted me to protect you, so the Immortal Palace gave the decree to the Heartless Palace. Could it be that you have already colluded with the Immortal Palace and even sacrificed your life to be loyal to the Immortal Palace? It would have been fine if you didn't say it, but I'm even more suspicious now." Yu Qianqiu rubbed his blood-stained chin. "You know about the Great Bright Wheel, right? What does this have to do with the Great Bright Wheel?" Ash-gray Cloud Xian squinted his eyes and asked. "The Immortal Emperor ordered me to compose a song, and the person who passed the decree was the Great Bright Wheel. What's so strange about that? The Great Bright Wheel is in charge of the Immortal World Commerce Alliance, and the illusionary Immortal City is his territory. Your World Commerce Alliance is in his territory, so it's normal to find him to pass the decree," Ash-gray Cloud Xian said calmly. "That's normal, but now that I think about it, the most abnormal thing is that he was the one who asked me to come out to collect new things. When I was worried that we would become enemies and that you would secretly plot against me, he suggested that I find you to protect me. He said that you have mastered the Heartless Palace's 3 swords into 1 sword drawing style. With your protection, few people in the world can touch me, so it's definitely safe." Yu Qianqiu put his head behind his back and said suspiciously, "And I was worried that you wouldn't agree, but he told me to find you first. If you didn't agree, he would think of a way to ask for a decree from the Immortal Palace and have the Heartless Palace's sect master Wang Qing pressure you. At that time you would have no choice but to agree. Because he is friends with Yun Peng and Wei Chuanxiu, I believed him. You know what happened next?" Ash-gray Cloud Xian was shocked when he heard this, and he gritted his teeth as he muttered to himself, "So this was all a trap that was already planned? F***ck. I only realized it now. I clearly knew that if I begged you, you definitely wouldn't agree to protect me, but I was still foolishly tricked by him to find you, thinking that I could disgust you. Now that I think about it, the advantage of doing this is to get rid of their suspicion. It's easy to announce to the public that I begged you but couldn't, so I begged the Immortal Palace. And for the Immortal Emperor's wedding, the Immortal Palace had no choice but to fulfill my request and send a decree to the Heartless Palace." Chapter 1041. At this point, Yu Qianqiu suddenly took out his empty hand from his back and slapped his thigh. He exclaimed in shock, "Oh my God!" The Chamber of Commerce's great bright wheel master, the Immortal Palace's external affairs commander Wu Xiong, and they even mobilized an early-stage underworld emperor expert in the underworld. Even the Dark Army is involved. Could it be that such a large force is working together just to kill me, Yu Qianqiu? What a joke. They think too highly of me, Yu Qianqiu. He frowned and turned to Zhang Yunxin, who was frowning in thought. He hit his chest with the back of his hand and asked, "Old Zhang, help me analyze this. You see, such a large force is definitely not something an ordinary person can control. Do you think that immortal Emperor Jin Tai is behind all this? Otherwise, who would be able to mobilize these people?" Your expression changed. Could I have guessed correctly? Is it really against your heartless palace? Then I'm being wronged. Zhang Yunxin's expression did change. After being analyzed by Yu Yang's vicious mouth and the facts laid out in front of him, it was hard not to believe it. He couldn't help but connect all the things that had happened from start to finish and think about it. The Immortal Emperor suddenly issued a decree to a small world Chamber of Commerce master to have him compose for the Immortal Emperor's wedding. This was an unimaginable matter, and many people still couldn't understand it. Then the Great Bright Wheel instigated Yu Qianqiu to seek his protection. This was believable. Unless Yu Qianqiu was an idiot, he would be able to figure it out even if he used his ass to think. It was absolutely impossible for Yu Qianqiu to agree. If it wasn't for someone's instigation, if Yu Qianqiu really wanted Yi Fuqian to protect him, he could have directly asked the Immortal Palace for help. Why did he have to go around in a roundabout way to humiliate himself and then ask the Immortal Palace for help? Was there something wrong with his brain? With this scoundrel's craftiness, he definitely wouldn't do such a stupid thing. The Great Bright Will clearly wanted to get rid of the suspicion that the Immortal Palace was behind this. At the same time, the sect happened to monitor the Great Bright Wheel visiting the World Chamber of Commerce several times. Normally, it would be difficult for a large sect to invite him, let alone visit the World Chamber of Commerce so frequently. After he refused, the Immortal Palace used Yu Qianqiu's mouth to issue a decree to the Heartless Palace to force him to protect Yu Qianqiu. The most ridiculous thing was that when something happened to a minor character like Yu Qianqiu, the entire Heartless Palace would be implicated. The reason was that he was afraid he wouldn't protect Yu Qianqiu and would miss the Immortal Emperor's wedding ceremony. The decree was equivalent to the Heartless Palace falling into a trap. The rest would be easy. They just had to kill Yu Qianqiu. The reason why they were beating around the bush was that the Immortal Palace wanted to find a justifiable excuse to attack the Heartless Palace. Otherwise, they were afraid that the sects in the celestial world would be in a state of panic, which would be detrimental to their rule. It should be known that the previous few top sects in the celestial world had been eliminated by the Immortal Palace with a justifiable excuse. The higher-ups of the Heartless Palace, led by sect master Wang Qin, had already expected this. However, they didn't expect it to be this fast. The Immortal Palace was already prepared to act. Hee. Looks like I've really been implicated by the Heartless Palace. Yu Qianqiu stared at Grey Cloud Xan and gritted his teeth. In his heart, he was secretly apologizing to Great Bright Luan. In order to increase his credibility, he hoped that Great Bright Luan would understand. At the same time, he felt that Great Bright Luan should be able to understand. Anyway, now that things had come to this, he understood that he wasn't just Grey Cloud Xian's enemy. The Heartless Palace wouldn't let him go either. Thus, he took this opportunity to provoke the Heartless Palace. If he could force the Heartless Palace to rebel, then the Immortal Palace would help him take care of this troublesome matter. The Heartless Palace wouldn't just sit and wait for death. They were a bunch of powerful people. Implicated you? If I didn't save you, you'd be dead. Grey Cloud Xang quickly regained his composure. He didn't admit or deny that the Immortal Palace was targeting the Heartless Palace. He naturally wouldn't spread this kind of thing. Instead, he stared at Yu Qianqiu and sneered. You killed Wu Xiong's father-in-law. You should think about how to explain this to Wu Xiong. What do I have to explain to him? Who saw me kill Mu Bing? Yu Qianqiu raised Mu Bing's head and sneered. It was clearly those people from Dongshan who killed Mu Bing. Don't act like nothing happened. You and I both know the reason behind this. The Immortal Palace must also know that we killed him. Not only will framing me benefit, but it will also buy time for the Heartless Palace to prepare. As long as the cover isn't lifted, the Immortal Palace won't have a legitimate reason to act against the Heartless Palace. You should be thanking me. Although he said this, only he knew the real reason. Once the news of Mu Bing's death reached the immortal world, as long as Wu Xiong wasn't stupid, he should know that Wu Xiong dared to kill his father-in-law. Wu Xiong would naturally understand that Wu Xiong had something on him. If Wu Xiong still acted rashly, then he would try and see what the consequences would be if the Immortal Emperor found out. Wu Xiong should know which was more important. Currently the one who posed the least threat was Wu Xiong. Hearing this, Songyun Xian's eyes flickered. Although he didn't say anything, he understood that at the moment, this was indeed the best way to prevent the Immortal Palace from directly acting against the Heartless Palace. Just as Yu Qianzhou said, it could delay the outbreak of the crisis and allow the Heartless Palace to make more preparations. After letting out a slight sigh, he looked at Yu Qianzhou, whose chest and mouth were covered in blood. He frowned slightly and said, "You're injured like this, are you all right?" To him, Yu Qianzhou couldn't have anything happen to Yu Qianzhou, especially after he thought he knew the truth about the Immortal Palace targeting the Heartless Palace. Yu Qianzhou touched the blood scab on his chin and smiled sheepishly. "It's not the first time I've been injured. Injuries, I get used to them. I recover quickly. I'm almost healed." Songyun Xian was stunned. He looked him up and down with some disbelief. Anyone who was beaten to the point of vomiting so much blood, how could they recover so quickly? Seeing that he didn't believe him, Yu Qianzhou didn't want to reveal the miraculous effects of the golden bead to him. He quickly shook the head in his hand and changed the topic. "Let's go. It's time to let the people outside know the truth." He flashed towards the exit, and Songyun Xian followed. After the two of them flashed out of the ground, Yu Qianzhou flew directly to the broken statue standing in the center of Twilight City, ignoring the surprised and doubtful gazes around him. He landed on the top of the giant statue, looked around and immediately stared speechlessly at the ruins of half of the city. After a while, he tilted his head and looked at Songyun Xian, who had landed beside him. He guessed that this old man had pulled out that shocking sword to scare people again. Withdrawing his gaze from Songyun Xian, he raised the head in his hand to the crowd and shouted at General Liu. "General Liu, your men colluded with Dong Shunlai and the others to kill the people of the immortal world. The heads are here. How do you explain that?" "Ridiculous. Who can testify to that?" General Liu gritted his teeth and said, "I suspect that you were the one who killed him and framed my men." "Oh." Songyun Xian shouted coldly. His right hand touched the storage bracelet on his left wrist. He took a step forward and said, "You took Mu Bing and the others out of the prison ahead of time, and Yu Qianzhou was locked in a cage by you. I only rescued him from the cage just now. How did he kill Mu Bing? Although the 7 criminals have already been killed by my sword, their frantic escape is obvious to everyone. Don't tell me you still want to lie through your teeth? Justice is clear. If you dare to brazenly accuse others, I, Songyun Xian, will not let you off even if I have to die." Yu Qianzhou was very pleased to hear this. His previous persuasion work hadn't been in vain. This was the first time that this old man had taken the initiative to cooperate with him. Furthermore, his reasoning was so reasonable and well-founded that Yu Qianzhou's suspicions were cleared. Now, no one would believe that he was the culprit except for the mastermind behind the scenes. However, General Liu was one of the masterminds behind the scenes. He naturally knew that no one else could have killed Mu Bing. There was no one else but Yu Qianzhou. However, the inside story could not be made public. Moreover, Songyun Xian was clearly threatening him, so he could only suffer in silence. He secretly clenched his teeth and said slowly, after hearing Master Tsang's words, "This reminds me that Yu Qianzhou is indeed still locked in a cage and unable to commit murder. Perhaps there is some inside story behind this. I will definitely get to the bottom of this." Many of the onlookers thought that there was a grudge between Yu Qianzhou and Mu Bing and thought that it was very likely that Yu Qianzhou had killed Mu Bing. However, even General Liu said that Yu Qianzhou could not commit murder while locked in a cage, so they immediately dispelled this idea. For a moment, they began to wonder if the Onyx army had colluded with outsiders to commit murder. But why? Songyun Xian snorted coldly and said nothing more. Both sides knew that this matter would be investigated, but there was no time limit at all. It would definitely be investigated until the end. However, neither he nor Yu Qianzhou wanted to be entangled in this matter as long as they were not implicated. "Master Tsang." General Liu, who was floating in the air ahead, suddenly spoke again. "In addition to the 7 murderers who were killed, more than half of Twilight City has been destroyed, and so many cultivators of the Immortal and Netherworld have been killed by you. Although it was an unintentional mistake, this is my territory. How do you expect me to explain to my superiors that such a big thing has happened?" Songyun Xian immediately narrowed his eyes and stared at him. It was obvious that the other party had suffered a loss just now and was now looking for trouble. In the Immortal and Netherworld, it had always been the strong who had the final say. Those who had connections, ability, and background would naturally settle the score with him afterward. Those who did not have the ability could only blame it on their bad luck. There was no need for him to stand up for them. However, this was someone else's territory, and he had indeed destroyed Twilight City. If someone insisted on making things difficult for him, it would be understandable. What do you want? Songyun Xian said indifferently. General Lu glanced at Yu Qianqiu meaningfully and then replied, Master Tsang, it was an unintentional mistake, but I dare not make the decision on my own. I have to report back to my superiors and wait for their instructions before making a decision. Before that, please cooperate with me and don't leave Twilight City for the time being. Otherwise it will be difficult to find you. Chapter 1042. As he said this, the thousands of soldiers of the Onyx army behind him slowly formed a battle formation and floated in the air. This was a blatant threat. Previously, Songyun Xian had threatened him, so he immediately retaliated. In fact, he did not want to threaten Songyun Xian. Who knew if Songyun Xian would attack him? That was a matter of life and death. However, if he did not regain his lost face, he would not only lose his own face, but also the face of the entire Onyx army. He could not afford to bear such a heavy responsibility. Of course, there was another reason. Yu Qianqiu secretly cursed. What did Songyun Xian killing people and destroying Twilight City have to do with him? He immediately guessed the intention of General Lu. The other party obviously saw that the assassination attempt on him had failed. With Songyun Xian present, it would not be good for him to act on his own. He needed to ask for instructions on how to proceed next, so he left him behind. The night wind blew like a tide, and the sound of waves in the distance was faint. The two standing on the high afterimage looked at each other. It was not difficult to force their way out of the encirclement of the Onyx army, but the consequences were serious. This was tantamount to going against the entire Onyx army of the underworld. At this point they could only take one step at a time. After the two secretly discussed, Songyun Xian could not show weakness. Yu Qianqiu then laughed and said, We were going to stay in Twilight City for a few days, but General Lu had better hurry up and ask for instructions. We will not wait after that. That's good. Guards. General Lu turned back and shouted, Send 100 capable men to protect them so that no one will disturb them. After saying this he flashed back. The thousands of soldiers of the Onyx army in the air also left one after another, leaving only 100 of them. Everyone knew that the protection was fake, but the surveillance was real. The crowd gradually dispersed. Half of Twilight City had been destroyed. Many people had to deal with the aftermath and ask for instructions from the higher-ups on how to deal with this matter. Of course, it was not that everyone had no temper, but because Songyun Xian's sword was too terrifying. Otherwise, Songyun Xian would have been surrounded and beaten up. Old Song, the Hidden Dragon Manor's territory seems to have been destroyed by you. Where should we go? Yu Qianqiu looked around the ruins and smiled bitterly. Old Song, it seems like you've destroyed the Hidden Dragon Manor's territory. Speak of the devil. Ding Xiang, who was in a sorry state, flew over and stood in front of the two. He stared at Songyun Xian and said through gritted teeth, Songyun Xian, nearly half of my disciples died under your sword. Even I almost lost my life. How do you explain this? He was relatively unlucky. Because he did not want to get involved in the matters of these two people, he did not come out to watch the show for fear of being implicated. In the end he was almost killed by a single sword strike from Songyun Xian. Fortunately he was lucky enough to escape. It wasn't that he felt sorry for his dead disciples, but that he wanted to vent his anger. You are also clear about the matter. It is useless for me to explain. If there is anything you can ask your Hidden Dragon Villa to discuss it with my Heartless Palace. I don't have time to talk to you endlessly. If you continue to be so long-winded, I don't mind killing one more. Songyun Xian snorted coldly and revealed his dominance. Ding Xiang immediately lost his temper. At the side Yu Qianqiu looked at Ding Xiang and chuckled. He thought to himself, aren't you looking for trouble for yourself? He Jinquang and Xin Yu quickly flew over. He Jinquang's face was abnormally excited. He did not feel a headache because Songyun Xian had caused trouble. Instead, he cupped his hands respectfully and said, High Priest, I have already ordered my disciples to clean up the rooms. There are too many people here. Why don't you come to our place to rest? The Heartless Palace's business was located in the opposite direction of the destroyed area, so it was fine. They could only do this. Under He Jinquang's lead, the few of them quickly flew to the Heartless Palace's business. Ding Xiang, who was in a sorry state, was left speechless. Around the Heartless Palace's business, the hundreds of soldiers of the Dark Underworld Army were blatantly monitoring the surroundings. After He Jinquang personally arranged their accommodations, Songyun Xian took the opportunity when Yu Qianqiu led Xinyu to check the living environment to signal He Jinquang. The two of them were about to leave when Yu Qianqiu, who was strolling around with his hands behind his back, looked back and smiled. He had roughly guessed what Songyun Xian was going to do. He immediately shouted, "Elder He, please wait." The two of them stopped and turned around. He Jinquang smiled in confusion and said, "What orders does sect leader you have?" Yu Qianqiu walked over with Mu Bing's head in his hand. He said, "Elder He, please arrange for someone to send this to Wu Xiong of the Immortal Palace. Tell him that I passed it to him. Also, help me pass a message to Wu Xiong and his wife. Tell them that my ability is limited and I could not save Mu Bing's life. I could not even keep his corpse intact. I am ashamed that only his head was left." This. He Jinquang immediately looked at Songyun Xian awkwardly. What a joke. How could he interfere in something like this? Songyun Xian fell silent for a moment. Then he frowned and said, "I can arrange for someone to bring Mu Bing's head over for you, but to pass a message. Why don't you leave a message in a jade archive and pass it to Wu Xiong and his wife along with Mu Bing's head?" Yu Qianqiu understood He Jinquang's concerns. He chuckled and took out a jade archive. He wrote a few words on it, then passed it to He Jinquang along with Mu Bing's head. Since Songyun Xian had instructed him to do so, He Jinquang could only reluctantly accept these two items. Inside the secret chamber of Unrequited Love Palace's branch, Songyun Xian solemnly laid down a soundproof enchantment the moment he entered. Then he took out a jade archive. After some thought, he wrote quite a few things on it. After he was done, he carefully checked it a few times. Then he added a special restriction of Unrequited Love Palace onto the jade archive. He Jinquang's eyelids twitched. He knew that this restriction was a self-destruct restriction. If someone didn't know how to undo it and forcefully opened it, the contents of the jade archive would immediately self-destruct. Even he, an elder, wouldn't be able to undo it. Songyun Xian handed the jade archive over and said in a deep voice, "Bring some people with you and return to the immortal realm immediately. You must personally deliver this jade archive to the sect master. Remember, it can only be handed over to the sect master. It cannot fall into anyone else's hands. If you run into any trouble along the way, you can say that you were entrusted by Yu Qianqiu to deliver Mu Bing's head to Wu Xiong. If you run into any trouble that you can't solve, destroy this jade archive immediately. It cannot fall into anyone else's hands. This is an important matter. Do you understand?" If it weren't for the fact that he couldn't send messages across the two realms, and that he couldn't leave this place for the time being, he wouldn't have handed over the contents of this jade archive to someone else. He Jinquang's expression turned solemn. To think that this was something that couldn't be handed over and could only be presented directly to the sect master, Unrequited Love Palace. He didn't even need to think to know that it was something extremely important. He immediately nodded and said, "Don't worry, High Deacon. I know what to do." After Songyun Xian reminded him again, the two of them left the secret room together. He Jinquang then quickly arranged the matters here. He himself picked dozens of people and quickly flew out of Twilight City. They weren't the only ones who left Twilight City at the same time. Since the Immortal Realm and the Netherworld couldn't send messages directly, the other sects had sent people back to the Immortal Realm to report what had happened here. In this way, everyone could travel together on the way, reducing a lot of risk. Yu Qianqiu leaned against the stone window. After seeing He Jinquang leave with his people, he turned around and walked to Songyun Xian, who had just entered the room as if nothing had happened. He was a little puzzled and said, "I didn't expect so many sects to send people to guard Twilight City. I wonder what kind of business everyone is doing here?" Songyun Xian didn't hide anything and told him directly. Since the Netherworld had a rule since ancient times, people from the Netherworld were not allowed to do business with the Immortal Realm. Twilight City was actually a black market trading center under the command of the army of the Netherworld. People from the Immortal Realm and the Netherworld had to abide by the rules if they wanted to do business here. The so-called rules were because there was the protection of the army of the Netherworld here, so people could trade with peace of mind. Therefore, protection fees must be paid. If they didn't pay, they wouldn't be able to survive here. As for what to trade between the Immortal Realm and the Netherworld, what the Netherworld lacked the most were all kinds of weapons and magic treasures. It had to be known that the Netherworld was vast and had a large population. There were often fights and killings, so the consumption of weapons and magic treasures was a huge number. Unfortunately, weapons and magic treasures must be refined by controlling fire. However, fire was the natural nemesis of meditation, which became the biggest obstacle for meditation cultivators to refine magic treasures and weapons. However, these obstacles were not a problem at all for the cultivators of the immortal realm. If you meditation cultivators want it, we can refine it for you. Of course, we can't give it to you for free. Naturally, you have to pay the price. Therefore, the netherworld was extremely rich in reserves, and the spirit stones that the cultivators of the immortal realm needed became the best trading item. At the same time, you could find some rare minerals and metals in the immortal realm in the netherworld, which were all needed for refining magic treasures. A buyer and a seller's market was formed. Those who could do business in Twilight City were some of the top sects among the tens of thousands of sects in the immortal realm. As for those small sects, it was a problem whether they could reach here safely. They were afraid that before the transaction was completed, the things in their hands would have been snatched away. Therefore, those small sects and small merchants only dared to look for business opportunities not too far from the entrance to the netherworld. But then again, the small sects and small chambers of commerce almost didn't have anything good in their hands. The various forces in the netherworld didn't care about their things, and the rich reserves of spirit stone mines in the netherworld were mostly controlled by the various forces. Those small sects could only find some scattered small forces or loose cultivators to do business with. This was a vicious cycle. So that's how it is. Yu Qianqiu nodded slowly and frowned. If that's the case, wouldn't the big refining sects in the immortal realm, such as the mythical fire palace, make a fortune? Songyun Xang couldn't help but sneer. Making a fortune depends on one's ability. As long as the mythical fire palace has the guts to eat it alone, no one will say anything. Yu Qianqiu was startled and thought about it. If the mythical fire palace cut off everyone's source of wealth, it would be strange if everyone did not join forces to kill it. However, thinking of the big sects making a fortune here, he couldn't help but feel a little itchy. He rubbed his hands and asked, I wonder if the World Chamber of Commerce can send some people to Twilight City to do business. Chapter 1043. There's nothing you can't do as long as you have the ability to settle any trouble in the underworld. But Songyun Xen looked out the window and said lightly, you should think of a way to get through this first. Hearing this, Yu Qianqiu's heart immediately stopped itching. His expression twitched. He wasn't afraid of trouble, but he couldn't make a fortune here if he didn't settle the trouble with the Onyx army. After all, this was the territory of the Onyx army, and a powerful dragon couldn't suppress a local snake. When he was imprisoned, he thought that he didn't have to worry about the Great Ming Wheel's owner token. He could ask the supreme commander of the Onyx army, Madame He Qi, for help. But now, it seemed that he didn't know if Madame He Qi had intervened in this matter, so he couldn't rush to take out the Great Ming Wheel's owner token. However, he had to solve this problem. First, he had to continue looking for Bai Changchun in the underworld. Even if he didn't look for Bai Changchun, he couldn't never come to the underworld again. Suddenly, Yu Qianqiu's eyes lit up. He suddenly remembered the woman with half her face covered by a black veil. He remembered that the underworld saintess had given Yu Ji a token, saying that it could help her when she was in trouble. He wondered if it was true or not. Old song. Have you heard of the underworld saintess? Yu Qianqiu asked as he rubbed his chin. Songyun Xan and Xin Yu looked at him almost at the same time, their expressions a little stunned. Songyun Xan asked suspiciously, the underworld saintess? I've heard of her, but no one has seen her before. It's said that this woman has always lived in seclusion and is even more mysterious than the emperor of the underworld, Bai Qi. She has a very high status in the underworld royal palace. Why are you asking about her? Don't tell me you know the underworld saintess. Xin Yu also looked suspicious. I really do know her. Yu Qianqiu shrugged at the two non-committally. It was fine as long as he confirmed that the underworld saintess was as powerful as she said. He changed the topic. After a while, he suddenly asked Songyun Xen mysteriously, do you have a secluded place that I can borrow? The kind where I won't be disturbed? What for? Songyun Xan was puzzled. Why are you asking so many questions? I have my own uses for it, Yu Qianqiu said mysteriously. Grey Cloud Xn looked slightly unhappy and said in a deep voice, follow me. After saying that, he walked out. Yu Qianqiu waved at Jiu Yu indicating for him to follow. Songyun Xan led the two of them to the secret underground chamber. He wanted to see what Yu Qianqiu was up to. However, Yu Qianqiu said to him in a righteous tone, personal privacy. No peeking. Songyun Xn immediately flung his sleeves and walked out angrily. Xin Yu was very self-aware. He wanted to respect Yu Qianqiu's privacy, but Yu Qianqiu pointed at him and shouted, "Help me guard the door. Don't let anyone peek in." Xinyu nodded and stood guard outside the door. Yu Qianqiu sealed the stone door of the underground chamber. After checking around the room, he suddenly disappeared inside. In the ghost realm of the human realm, under the gloomy clouds and the chilly wind, Yu Qianqiu suddenly appeared outside the Ghost King's hall. He strode towards the Ghost King's hall. The ghost cultivators guarding outside immediately knelt down in fear and trepidation to greet him. Before walking up the steps of the Ghost King's hall, Yu Ji and the rest were startled by the 3 words "Torture Envoy." With Yu Ji leading the way, they all rushed outside to greet him. "Rise." Yu Qianqiu raised his hand calmly at the crowd. He then pointed at Yu Ji and smiled. "Come with me." The group of people slowly stood up with a respectful expression. "Yes." Yu Ji followed behind Yu Qianqiu. The 2 of them walked up the steps in front of the Ghost King's hall and disappeared into the depths of the palace. After walking to the center of the hall, Yu Qianqiu stopped and looked around the Ghost King's hall. He found that it was still the same as before. There was no change at all. Yu Ji stood behind him and cupped her fists. "Yu Ji awaits your orders?" Yu Qianqiu turned around and looked at the beautiful lady in front of him. He could still vaguely remember the scene when they first met. He smiled. "I'm here to borrow something from you. Do you still have the token that the underworld saintess gave you?" Yu Ji was slightly startled. Then she quickly took out the black token that was less than the size of a palm from the storage bag at her waist and handed it over with both hands. Yu Qianqiu took it and looked at it again. On one side was a cloud pattern and on the other side was a mountain. There were 6 peaks on the mountain. The 5 peaks surrounded the highest peak in the center. There was a majestic palace in the middle. The material of the token seemed to be a very rare kind of wood. It was completely black. It was the token that he had seen in the past. In the past, Yu Qianqiu wouldn't have known what the palace on the command token meant. However, his current experience couldn't be compared to the past. After pondering for a moment, he faintly guessed that the palace guarded by the 5 peaks was probably the illustrious Nether Imperial Palace. "I'll borrow it for a while. I'll return it to you when the time comes." Yu Qianqiu put it away with a smile. His eyes inadvertently glanced at the storage bag at her waist. He took out 2 storage bracelets and handed them to her. "I won't lend it to you for free. These 2 bracelets can be used as rent. There are 10 storage spaces in each bracelet. They are more convenient and useful than storage bags." Yu Ji was startled again. She immediately bowed in fear. Yu Ji doesn't dare. To her, the token was of no use at all. If it was not for the fact that Yu Qianqiu had mentioned it, she would have forgotten about it. Even if Yu Qianqiu asked for it, she would not feel anything. How would she dare to accept the rent from the torture envoy? "Just take it. It's not something valuable. I have many of them." Yu Qianqiu grabbed her hand and forcefully shoved it into her hand. However, he was pondering in his heart. If that netherworld saintess wanted to find out why the token ended up in his hands, he would at least have a reason to deal with it. Yu Ji's body could not help but tremble. After so many years, he was the second man who had grabbed her hand. She held the pair of bracelets and bowed. "Thank you, torture envoy." Yu Qianqiu did not want to be polite with her. He smiled and said, "There's something you need to prepare in advance. You need to secretly look for a candidate to take over your position as the Ghost King. Don't announce it for now. Maybe I'll take you out of the demon realm soon." Yu Ji suddenly raised her head. Her eyes were full of surprise and anxiety. Most of all, she was confused about the unknown future. "Don't think too much. I'm asking you to do something for me. Of course, this is just my temporary idea. We'll talk about it when the time comes." Yu Qianqiu smiled and waved his hand. "All right. I still have something to do. Go ahead." Before Yu Ji could respectfully send him off, Yu Qianqiu had already disappeared from the hall. She could not help but stare at the pair of storage bracelets in her hand in a daze. Why did he give her bracelets? Did the torture envoy fall in love with her? Thinking about it, she felt relieved. Just now, she did not see any lust in the torture envoy's eyes. Moreover, with the power of the torture envoy, he could get any kind of woman he wanted with just a word. Obviously, she had thought too much. She then began to examine the 2 storage bracelets, and discovered that there really were 10 storage spaces within each bracelet. She was pleasantly surprised as she wore the bracelets on her wrists, and after comparing them, she discovered that they were indeed much more useful than storage pouches. The stone door of the secret chamber guarded by Jianghu was pushed open with a rumble, and Yu Qianqiu walked out with a smile. Jianghu turned around and looked at him in confusion. He had only gone in for such a short time, and he had already come out. He did not know what secret he was doing. The two of them walked up the stairs leading to the underground secret chamber and found that Songyun XN was guarding outside with his hands behind his back. He looked at Yu Qianqiu with sparkling eyes. Yu Qianqiu smiled and said, "Why are you looking at me like that?" "I've been thinking about a problem. You've been neglecting your work. The date of the immortal emperor's wedding is not far away." "Let's see how you're going to explain it then." Songyun Xian sneered. Yu Qianqiu climbed up the last stone step. He held his stomach with both hands and chuckled. "You don't understand. Walking around and seeing more can increase the inspiration for composing. The reason why I wanted to find a place where no one would disturb me was that I suddenly had good inspiration and needed to sort it out." After that he slowly walked away. Songyun Xn looked at his back skeptically. The three of them stayed in the same room for a whole day. Yu Qianqiu, who was sleeping soundly with his head covered, suddenly sat up. The other two people sitting cross-legged looked at him in confusion. Yu Qianqiu jumped off the stone bed, looked out the window and said in a deep voice, "What the hell is that Lu Lin doing? He hasn't reported back after waiting for a whole day. I still have things to do and don't have time to play with him." They had now figured out the name of General Lu. "Then what do you want? Do you really have the guts to go against the army of Onyx? They don't care if you have the immortal emperor's Dharma body or not," Songyun Xian said disdainfully. "If a tiger doesn't show its might, you think I'm a sick cat. Let's go. Let's go find him." Yu Qianqiu strode outside. He was full of confidence now and was just waiting for a chance to go crazy. He had waited patiently for a day and would not wait another day. Songyun Xian wanted to stop him and tell him not to be impulsive, but Yu Qianqiu had already flown into the sky. He hurriedly chased after him with Xinyu. "Stop!" A loud shout sounded. 100 figures surrounded the three of them from all directions. The leader held a saber at his waist and said coldly, "Where do you want to go?" "Tell that Lu guy to come see me," Yu Qianqiu said with a gloomy expression. The leader said indifferently, "The general is not free right now." "Quite arrogant. Then I'll go see him." Yu Qianqiu's body moved, and the leading general pulled out his saber with a clang. The surrounding 100 soldiers immediately pulled out their sabers in a threatening manner. This immediately attracted many people to fly into the sky to watch. "Get lost!" Yu Qianqiu shouted and slapped with one palm. Countless purple flame high-energy sabers immediately spun around him like a tornado, wrapping him up and rushing forward. He did not suppress the terrifying aura that could make the meditation cultivators' hearts palpitate. The people who blocked him did not know the depth of his aura and immediately dodged in shock. Songyun Xian was shocked. What was wrong with this kid? He dared to attack the Onyx army without a word. Jiu Yu and Songyun Xian quickly followed. The meditation cultivator general who dodged did not dare to forcibly stop Songyun Xian without receiving a death order, so he let the two pass. However, he then took out a black horn, raised it in front of his mouth and blew it. The dull sound of the horn immediately resounded throughout Twilight City. Countless people were startled by the battle horn of the Onyx army and flew into the sky to see what was going on. More than 1,000 soldiers of the Onyx army quickly flew into the sky with a murderous aura. General Lu Lin, who was leading them, strode out of the city guard's mansion. Yu Qianqiu and the other two stood at the gate of the city guard's mansion. Songyun Xian and Jiu Yu looked at Yu Qianqiu in front of them with some bewilderment. They did not know what this guy wanted to do. The surrounding crowd looked at the three of them in shock. They were a little worried that Songyun Xian would make a move again and cause trouble for everyone. General Lu Lin looked at the three of them with burning eyes and said in a deep voice, "What's going on?" The general who blew the horn quickly came over and reported, "General, Yu Qianqiu said he wants to see you. I told you that the general is not free, but he attacked the Onyx army." Lu Lin suddenly stared at Yu Qianqiu and he sneered repeatedly. "How audacious of you to dare make a move against my Onyx army. Do you really think we're just there for show? Don't talk nonsense here." Yu Qianqiu stood with his hands behind his back and said expressionlessly, "I gave Madame Heiqi face and waited patiently for a day. Didn't you say you were going to report to the higher-ups? I'm here to listen to your higher-ups' decision. If there's nothing else, I'll be leaving first." Lu Lin completely ignored Yu Qianqiu and only stared coldly at Songyun Xian. "Consecrator Songyun, I only have one question for you. Are you going to stay and wait for instructions from our higher-ups, or are you going to accompany Yu Qianqiu and force your way out?" The threat in his words was very strong. Songyun Xian's eyes flickered. It was easy to charge out, but he couldn't escape forever. The Onyx army was filled with experts. He was afraid that once he charged out, he would immediately be chased endlessly. I'm giving you face but you don't want it. Yu Qianqiu laughed coldly. He reached out with one hand from behind his back, and the hand inside his sleeve grabbed a black token. He slowly walked toward Lu Lin and said in a deep voice, "Open your dog eyes wide and take a good look." He guessed that the underworld saintess wouldn't fool people. He just didn't know how much trouble this token could solve. However, he believed that even if this token wasn't very useful, it could at least make the Onyx army wary and not dare to act recklessly. Lu Lin didn't care at all. He stared at Songyun Xn and was about to interrogate him when the expressions of the soldiers beside him changed at the same time. Suddenly, all of them knelt down on one knee toward Yu Qianqiu. "What are you doing?" Lu Lin was startled and shouted to his left and right. "General, it's the Onyx Emperor's token." Someone beside him transmitted his voice in a trembling voice. When Yu Qianqiu saw the kneeling soldiers, he was immediately emboldened. He laughed coldly and said, "How audacious of you to disregard the token in my hand. I want to see how many heads you have." When Lu Lin's gaze shifted to the token in Yu Qianqiu's hand, he was immediately stunned by the pattern of 5 peaks surrounding and protecting the main peak. That was obviously the Onyx Emperor Mountain. Especially the material of the token. It was made from the dark wood found in the dark wood forest in the back palace of the Onyx Royal Palace. In the entire netherworld, only the place where the Onyx Emperor resided would have dark wood growing. There was no way to fake it. He immediately cried out involuntarily, "The Onyx Emperor's token." Trembling, he bent his knees and knelt on the ground with a thud. He said in a trembling voice, "Your subordinate Lu Lin didn't know that you were coming. I deserve to die 10,000 times for my crime." When he knelt down, coupled with the words, "Onyx Emperor's token," the 1,000 soldiers in the sky immediately changed their expressions. They all knelt down on one knee and bowed. When this inexplicable scene came out, everyone was shocked. The Onyx Emperor's token. The sky was filled with voices. Whether it was the people from the immortal world or the netherworld, no one dared to be arrogant in the sky. They all flashed down and stood with their hands behind their backs, showing their respect to the reclusive Onyx Emperor. Songyun Xan and Shen Yu looked at Yu Qianqiu with their mouths agape. They couldn't have imagined that Yu Qianqiu would suddenly do this. Yesterday he was a prisoner of the Onyx army and was almost killed. Today he made the insufferably arrogant Onyx army submit to him with a wave of his hand. The contrast was too great. The shock in Songyun Xian's heart was indescribable. This was the legendary Onyx Emperor's token that was personally carved by the Onyx Emperor. It could command the entire netherworld. Although this token couldn't truly command the entire netherworld, how many people in the netherworld would dare to stop this token from going anywhere? It was no different from challenging the authority of the Onyx Emperor. The Onyx Emperor's anger could shake the entire 3 realms. He couldn't figure out why Yu Qianqiu had the Onyx Emperor's token. This thing couldn't be everywhere. He thought about it over and over again, but he still couldn't figure out how Yu Qianqiu got involved with the Onyx Emperor. In fact, not only them, even Yu Qianqiu was a little surprised. He guessed that this token would have some use, but he just wanted to solve the current problem. Just like Songyun Xan said, the day of the Immortal Emperor's wedding was not far away. It took more than half a month to travel from the entrance of the netherworld to Twilight City. Then, he would have to travel through the endless horizon to find Bai Changchun in the forbidden area of the netherworld. Who knew how much time it would take? Including the time needed to go back and forth, there really wasn't enough time. He couldn't afford to waste time here, so he borrowed the token in Yuji's hand, ready to solve the problem quickly. But he never dreamed that it would be the Onyx Emperor's token in his hand, the token that could make the army of the Dark Underworld surrender at its feet. It was over. Wasn't that saintess of the netherworld trying to cheat him? How could this thing be given away so casually? The key point was that it was given to a weak ghost cultivator like Yuji. Anyone would think that it was definitely not something too valuable. If it wasn't so, how could he take it out and cause such a big commotion? Yu Qianqiu smiled bitterly in his heart. At present he had solved the problem quickly, but this token turned out to be the Onyx Emperor's token. His power was a bit too much. Looking at the current situation, it was obvious that even an expert at the early stage of the Netherworld Emperor was trembling and kneeling at his feet. He was afraid that there would be more trouble in the future. First of all, once the news reached the ears of the Emperor of the Netherworld, Emperor Bai Qi would definitely find out how the Onyx Emperor's token came into his hands. Maybe he would send people to arrest him. Even if the Emperor of the Netherworld let him go, the immortal Emperor Jin Tai would probably want to find out why he had the Onyx Emperor's token. This was big trouble, and it was very likely that he would lose his foothold in both the immortal world and the netherworld. Chapter 1044. Yu Qianqiu slowly lowered his raised arm and put the token of the Underworld Emperor into his sleeve. He had 1,000 thoughts in his mind, but he looked calm on the surface as he walked toward the city guard mansion. When he passed by Lu Lin, he tilted his head and glanced at him, saying calmly, "Come with me." "Yes." Lu Lin quickly stood up and followed Yu Qianqiu into the city guard's mansion. Thousands of soldiers knelt motionlessly outside. No one dared to stand up on their own. Zhang Yunxian and Xin Yu were still in shock. Looking at Yu Qianqiu's back, they didn't dare to follow him in without permission. Yu Qianqiu's identity became the biggest question in their minds. In the main hall of the city guard's mansion, Yu Qianqiu casually set up a soundproof barrier. He turned to look at Lu Lin, who was standing with his hands behind his back in fear and trepidation. Without any preamble, he went straight to the point and asked, "Why did the Onyx army participate in Mu Bing's mission to kill me?" Lu Lin's face was pale as he said, "This subordinate doesn't know. This subordinate only received the commander's order to cooperate with Mu Bing's mission. I really don't know anything else." "Commander?" Yu Qianqiu raised an eyebrow and asked, "Wu Xiong?" Lu Lin was stunned. He couldn't understand why the person with the Emperor of the Underworld's token would ask such an idiotic question. He paused and quickly explained, "It's not Wu Xiong from the immortal world. It's the commander of our Onyx army, Hongji." Hongji. Yu Qianqiu immediately realized that he had made a mistake, but he didn't mind it at all. He narrowed his eyes and asked, "Does a commander have a lot of power? What rank is it in your Onyx army?" Hearing this, Lu Lin immediately realized that he knew nothing about the Onyx army, so he explained in detail in a fawning manner, "This subordinate holds the position of 1,000 guards in the Onyx army. Every 100,000 guards are under the control of a commander, and every commander is under the control of a grand commander. There are 10 grand commanders in total, and they all listen to Madame Blackpool's orders." Yu Qianqiu silently calculated, and after coming to a conclusion he was immediately shocked and said, "If that's the case, doesn't that mean that the army of Onyx has 100 million soldiers? Only more, no less." Lu Lin said respectfully, "Because the Netherworld's territory is too vast, 100 million soldiers are actually not enough. The combined forces of the various tyrants exceed 100 billion, and this doesn't even include those in the Netherworld River's water race. Our Dark Underworld army is still under great pressure. Fortunately, Madame is wise and has always been expanding the army." Damn it, was this not enough? They already had 100 million soldiers and they still wanted to expand? Yu Qianqiu was almost speechless. He only had 1 million cultivators in the human world, and most of them were below the soul formation stage. Every soldier in the Onyx army was at least a minor immortal. This Madame Blackpool's power was astonishing. But thinking about it, compared to the hundreds of billions of people under the Netherworld's tyrants, 100 million soldiers was indeed not a lot. Damn it. This Netherworld was really big to be able to accommodate so many people. No wonder even the Emperor of the Underworld by Qi could only intimidate and govern the Netherworld, but couldn't truly unify it. It was indeed very difficult to unify so many people. From this, Yu Qianqiu more or less understood some things. No wonder all the sects in the immortal world fought to make a fortune in the Netherworld. This was a huge market of more than 100 billion underworld cultivators. Even if each person bought an immortal world weapon or magic treasure, it would still be a huge number. The spirit stones developed in the Netherworld were enough to feed all the cultivators in the immortal world. It was said that the Netherworld royal palace prohibited the Netherworld from doing business with the immortal world, but with such a huge demand here, it was impossible for the Emperor of the Underworld by Qi to forcibly suppress it. Therefore he could only turn a blind eye to it. Otherwise, with the Emperor of the Underworld's eyes and ears, there was no way he wouldn't know about such a big black market in Twilight City, and he wouldn't allow the Onyx army to sit here and divide the spoils. One had to know that the Onyx army had hundreds of millions of soldiers and horses fighting everywhere, and the consumption of weapons and magic treasures was also huge. Yu Qianqiu came back to his senses and asked, "What's the background of that Dong Shunlai? Is he also a member of the Onyx army?" This subordinate has never seen this person before, but it shouldn't be difficult to find out his background. "I believe that you can use the Emperor of the Underworld's token to investigate the entire Onyx army," Lu Lin replied respectfully. Yu Qianqiu was speechless again. He was a fox borrowing the tiger's might, so how would he dare to use the Emperor of the Underworld's token to mobilize the entire Onyx army? Wouldn't that be courting death? Moreover, this matter involved the Onyx army. After thinking for a while, he knew that he couldn't stay here any longer, so he asked indifferently, "Can I leave now?" "Yes, sir." Lu Lin retreated to the side in fear. Yu Qianqiu snorted coldly, removed the soundproof barrier, and strode outside. Seeing nearly 1,000 soldiers still kneeling outside the mansion, he felt that it was even more unwise to stay here any longer. He quickly walked to Cangyun Xan and Xin Yu's side, took out his flying shuttle and said, "Everything is fine here, let's continue our journey." After saying that, he took the lead and jumped up first. Cangyun Xan and Xin Yu looked at each other, not knowing why he was in such a hurry, but they also flashed up. Yu Qianqiu didn't even look back as he flew away on his flying shuttle, leaving a group of people in Twilight City speechless. After a long time, Lu Lin confirmed that Yu Qianqiu had really left, and then he ordered his men to stand up. He felt like he was dreaming. Yu Qianqiu didn't hold him responsible for anything. On the flying shuttle far away from Twilight City, Yu Qianqiu suddenly shouted, "Old Song, you drive, let's hurry up." This time, Cangyun Xan didn't insist. He took over Yu Qianqiu's hand and after flying for a while he suddenly asked, "Yu Qianqiu, you have the Emperor of the Underworld's token, why didn't you take it out earlier?" Seeing that no one answered, he looked back and found that Yu Qianqiu was frowning and thinking about something, so he asked again, "Why are you in such a hurry to leave? You have the Emperor of the Underworld's token, did you ask about the assassination?" "Ask what?" Yu Qianqiu came back to his senses and smiled bitterly, "My Emperor of the Underworld's token is fake. If I continue to stay, I'm afraid I won't be able to leave. Old Song, you should go as fast as you can. I'm afraid there will be pursuers if you are too late." His words were half true and half false. In short, he hoped that Cangyun Xan could hurry up and reach the mysterious forbidden area of the underworld as soon as possible. Anyway, it was not good to stay in the underworld for a long time. Cangyun Xan and Xin Yu were speechless at the same time. They looked back at him in disbelief. They didn't expect him to dare to fake the Emperor of the Underworld's token. Now they understood why he was in such a hurry to leave. Fake the Emperor of the Underworld's token. Can't they tell the real from the fake? Yu Qianqiu, you are not joking, are you? Cangyun Xan was still in disbelief. Yu Qianqiu smiled bitterly and said, "I didn't know it was the Emperor of the Underworld's token. I just saw it once by accident. I heard that this token is very useful in the underworld, so I made a replica. I just wanted to use it to solve the problem at hand. I didn't expect it to be the Emperor of the Underworld's token. If I knew it was the Emperor of the Underworld's token, I wouldn't have taken it out. But don't worry, they won't find out for a while." "I think you are really tired of living. You even dare to fake the Emperor of the Underworld's token. Is there anything in this world that you don't dare to do? Even if you want to die, you don't have to drag the two of us into this." Cangyun Xan's face darkened on the spot. He had thought it strange earlier. How could Yu Qianqiu have the Emperor of the Underworld's token? It was unbelievable. It turned out that it was a fake. Damn it. I said I didn't do it on purpose. Didn't I do it with good intentions? Yu Qianqiu said angrily, "I really don't want to drag the two of you into this. If you are not happy, we will go our separate ways now." Hearing this, Cangyun Xan and Xin Yu's mouths twitched at the same time. The two of them wanted to go their separate ways, but could they? Their lives were tied to him. If he was finished, everyone would be finished with him. They had to think of a way to protect him. Cangyun Xan was so angry that he didn't say anything. His face darkened, but his flying speed gradually increased to the limit that he could control. After a moment of silence, Xin Yu said weakly, "I think we should go by water. Once the fake Emperor of the Underworld's token is exposed, the army of the underworld on land will immediately cast a net to capture us. We won't be able to escape. If we go by water, at least the army of the underworld won't dare to easily track us into the underworld river. It should be much safer than on land." "That makes sense." Yu Qianqiu nodded repeatedly. Cangyun Xan, who was silent with a darkened face, immediately steered the flying shuttle to change direction and quickly flew toward the underworld river. Fortunately, they weren't too far from the underworld river. Cangyun Xan flew quickly and reached the shore of the underworld river in half an hour. Yu Qianqiu put away the flying shuttle. Cangyun Xan quickly checked the surroundings and nodded to Xin Yu after confirming that there was no one around. Xin Yu didn't say anything and quickly transformed into his original form. He opened the clam and the other two quickly went in. The clam quickly closed and sank into the water. Xin Yu swam quickly in the underworld river. His stomach was white and beautiful. Sang Yun Xian and Yu Qianqiu felt a sense of security and couldn't help but heave a sigh of relief. Then, the two of them were stunned and stared at each other. In the end, it was Yu Qianqiu who tilted his head and lay down with his legs crossed. Why do you have to go to that mysterious forbidden area? I'm starting to wonder if you want to do something there. Sang Yun Xian sat cross-legged and asked in a deep voice. You don't know about this. You don't know how vast the underworld is unless you go there. How can you know what's so mysterious about it if you don't go there? Yu Qianqiu rested his head on his arm and looked at him. He sighed and said, Don't you think it's a pity that you can't go there in your lifetime? Nonsense. Sang Yun Xian snorted coldly. You should think about how we're going to return to the immortal realm. I only hate that the disciples of my heartless palace in Twilight City will be dragged down by you. Although he said that, he was worried about whether He Jingquang would be able to successfully deliver the Jade Archive to the sect master. Sigh. Yu Qianqiu let out a long sigh and closed his eyes. Right now, he was a little worried about the people from the World Chamber of Commerce. He wanted to make a trip back to the World Chamber of Commerce. However, he remembered that he had instructed Hibiscus and Wu Lixue to contact him immediately if anything went wrong. He felt a little relieved. Just like that, the two of them were sealed inside the clam, silently moving through the Netherworld River. Fortunately, several days passed without any incident. In the forest of the majestic imperial harem of the Netherworld Royal Palace, the sound of something rolling could be heard from the pavilion that stood quietly. A few large fireflies were crawling on the windowsill. Inside the window, a black wooden rocking chair had been placed next to the window. The white-robed scholar was lying on it, rocking slowly. He appeared to be at ease, his eyes slightly closed as he faced the window. If the night sky outside was filled with beautiful stars and a bright moon, he would probably open his eyes and slowly enjoy the view. However, the sky outside was forever black. There was really nothing to enjoy. With a flash of silver light, the 1,000 soldiers in silver armor appeared, floating outside the window and looking at him. The rocking chair was still rocking slowly. The scholar asked through the windowsill without opening his eyes, "You're here. How's the investigation going?" "I've investigated. That Yu Qianqiu is indeed holding the Emperor of the Netherworld's order carved from the Netherworld wood." The 1,000 soldiers in silver armor frowned and said, "It's strange. How did the Emperor of the Netherworld's order fall into his hands? Could it be that you carved more than 2 sides of the Emperor of the Netherworld's order? Or someone secretly cut down the Netherworld wood in the Netherworld forest and made an imitation? But that's not right. The Netherworld wood is hard and difficult to cut. It has branches but no leaves, so it's easy to count. I've already checked once and there's no damage at all." The scholar rolled his eyes and said indifferently, "Let's put this matter aside for now. Why did the army of the Netherworld of Twilight City get involved in the assassination of Yu Qianqiu? Have you found out?" "I can't find out for now. Several important clues have been cut off." The 1,000 soldiers in silver armor flashed into the attic, walked to the back of the rocking chair and gently shook it. He explained, "Mu Bing is dead. No one saw with their own eyes who killed him. And those who participated in the assassination were all killed by Ashiro Yunxin in a fit of rage. The captain of the 1,000 guards, Lu Lin, died the day after Yu Qianqiu left. The commander of Lu Lin, Hongji, also died. The reason was that they committed suicide to escape punishment after offending the Emperor of the Netherworld's order." Committing suicide to escape punishment? The scholar's eyes slowly opened, gleaming with a bright light. Then he slowly closed his eyes again. At the same time, the 1,000 soldiers in silver armor suddenly felt that the rocking chair was as heavy as 10,000 kilograms. It suddenly stopped rocking and he couldn't move the rocking chair anymore. He was slightly shocked, knowing that the seemingly indifferent scholar was angry. "Do you believe that it was suicide to escape punishment?" the scholar asked indifferently. The rocking chair could be rocked again, and the goo-goo sound of rolling back and forth sounded in the attic again. "Of course not." The 1,000 soldiers in silver armor rocked the rocking chair, and the corner of his mouth curled up into a cold smile. "I quickly ordered the network to comb through the whereabouts of these people and finally found some clues. The one who assassinated Yu Qianqiu was an early-stage emperor of the Netherworld, and he was a subordinate of the King of Black Mountain." "You mean that the Black Mountain and the army of Dark Hell are in cahoots?" the scholar asked indifferently. The 1,000 soldiers in silver armor shook his head slightly. "That's nothing. I'm worried that the Black Mountain, the army of Dark Hell, and the Immortal Palace in the Immortal World are in cahoots." "Are they plotting something?" the scholar said sarcastically. Even if I give the underworld palace to them, can they keep it under control? The 1,000 soldiers in silver armor chuckled and said, the matter is not confirmed yet. I have already sent people around the Black Mountain to investigate in secret. If this matter really has something to do with the Black Mountain, I believe it won't be long before we find out if the three parties are in cahoots. The scholar let out a nasal sound. His handsome face had a serene expression, as if he had fallen asleep. After a while, he suddenly raised his hand and said, someone is feeling guilty. Maybe your investigation has been discovered. You should leave. The 1,000 soldiers in silver armor looked outside the window and turned into a beam of light and flew out. Not long after he left, a black light landed on the stone path outside the attic. The cold and noble Lady Blackpool appeared. Hearing the rumbling sounds coming from the attic, she immediately knelt to the window and said, Blackpool requests an audience with the Emperor of the Underworld. A cold and emotionless voice came from the window. Did you forget that I said you are not allowed to come here without my summons? Go to the Red Armor Army and receive your punishment. Madame Blackpool trembled in fear. She kowtowed to him with a pale face and said, Please forgive me, Underworld Emperor. I have a grudge against the Red Armored Army. You will throw me to the boundless horizon. I begged the Emperor of the Underworld to listen to Blackpool's explanation. I barged in because I was flustered. Please forgive me, Emperor of the Underworld. Having said that, she kowtowed repeatedly on the stone path. You have hundreds of millions of soldiers under your command. You are second only to one and above tens of thousands. What can make you flustered? The voice drifted out from the window. I'd like to hear it. If your explanation can't satisfy me, you should go to the endless sea. Come up. Thank you for your mercy, Emperor of the Underworld. Lady Blackpool crawled up hastily. The mark on her forehead was still there. She could have dissolved the mark easily with her cultivation, but she purposely left it on her forehead. She walked quickly toward the attic, dragging the long black veil behind her as if she were a pitiful person. As she entered the attic, she saw the scholar swaying slowly on the rocking chair by the window. She walked quickly to the scholar and knelt down by his feet, saying with a sobbing tone, I'm guilty. I failed to live up to your expectations. The scholar didn't bat an eyelid. He said nonchalantly, Now that you have admitted your guilt, it means I didn't wrong you. Go to the endless sea. Lady Blackpool choked. She knew better than anyone else what it was like to be with a tiger, to be with the Emperor. Fortunately, she thought she had figured out the nature of the scholar. She plucked up her courage and moved to the opposite side of the scholar, sitting against the wall. She hugged one of the scholar's bare feet under the white robe and started massaging it. She squeezed out her tears sadly and said, Let me serve the Emperor of the Underworld for the last time. She buried her head in the scholar's bare foot and massaged it with just the right amount of strength. Suddenly, she found the scholar's other bare foot lifted up automatically, and the sole of his foot pressed on her plump breasts, moving up slowly. Lady Blackpool suddenly raised her head and saw the scholar open his eyes and look at her with a smile. At the same time, she found the restless sole of his foot had slid into her clothes along the neckline. Chapter 1045. Emperor of Netherworld. Madame Blackpool moaned and moved aside shyly. However, her clothes were hooked by the scholar's bare feet. The clothes were made of good material, silky and smooth. They were peeled off from her body instantly. She moved away, but her clothes didn't. She didn't have any underwear inside. Her snow-white and smooth upper body was exposed to the air. Madame Blackpool timidly covered her full breasts with her arms. She bit her red lips shyly. Her body was so alluring. You haven't served me for a long time. The scholar took his bare feet off the black dress and smiled at the snow-white and delicate body sitting in a pile of black palace dresses. I'm willing to serve you, Emperor of Netherworld, but I'm afraid that I won't have another chance. Madame Blackpool held her full breasts and lowered her head slightly. She looked like she was about to cry. Not necessarily, the scholar said lightly. He didn't say anything else. He just looked at her with a smile as if he was saying, Let's see your performance first. The atmosphere in the attic suddenly became very romantic. A few fireflies flew over and clung on the windowsill, making her beautiful body even more alluring. Madame Blackpool was like a bride on her first night. She released her arms shyly. Her unparalleled breasts amazed the scholar, who had seen them more than once. He watched her white and tender body slowly stand up from a pile of black palace dresses. She was naked and so perfect that it made people's hearts beat faster. Madame Blackpool spread her arms and pulled out the hairpin that tied her hair. Her black hair fell on her shoulders like a waterfall, reaching her waist and touching her butt. The hairpin fell on the ground. The cool night wind blew in through the window. Her waterfall-like hair fluttered in the wind, making the beautiful woman look even more alluring. Madame Blackpool's charm and beauty were undeniable. Otherwise, the proud scholar wouldn't have fallen in love with her and become his favorite concubine. She knew how to seduce men. She was experienced in doing so. However, this kind of woman usually didn't want to be ordinary. The scholar felt a bit sorry for her. However, it was hard to change one's nature. He would never spend time and energy on persuading or forcing her to change. He had to make use of things that couldn't be changed. The scholar lay on the rocking chair motionlessly and looked at her with a smile. Madame Blackpool took one step forward and bowed. "I will make up for my mistake and serve you with all my heart, Emperor of Netherworld." She gently grabbed onto one of the scholar's hands and pulled him up from the rocking chair. Then she wrapped her body around him and rubbed against him. Her slender fingers were like agile snakes as she unknowingly took off the white robe on the scholar's body. Then she went to the front of the scholar and pushed him down onto the rocking chair. The rocking chair couldn't help but shake. The woman couldn't wait and climbed on it impatiently. The woman climbed up and climbed on the scholar eagerly. With her red tongue, licked and teased the scholar. In the end, the woman buried her head in the scholar's lower body. When the erotic and decaying sounds were heard in the attic, the silver-armored soldier stood straight on the roof of the attic with his arms crossed. He was used to the sounds in the attic, but he still couldn't help but frown. The gentle sea, the passionate sea, the violent sea, and some people called it the Sea of Desire. After everything calmed down, a naked man and a woman were lying on the rocking chair in the attic. The rocking chair was a bit narrow. The woman had to curl up on the man's body. She rested her head on the man's shoulder, and her hair fell on the man's chest like a waterfall. The scholar held her with one hand and moved his other hand up and down Madame Blackpool's body. Finally, he played with her breasts and said with a faint smile, "You are getting better and better at serving people. It seems that you didn't raise those male pets in the palace for nothing." Madame Blackpool's blushing face suddenly turned pale. The scholar could feel her body stiffen. She whispered in his ear, "Ever since I followed the Emperor of Netherworld, I have been the woman of the Emperor of Netherworld. I will never let any man take my body. Those men are just servants who give me massages. Could it be that even you are jealous?" She chuckled. The scholar laughed out loud, pinched her plump breasts and asked, "Say it. Don't you want to explain something to me?" Madame Blackpool put her head on his shoulder and said with grievance, "It's all my fault. I was too eager to expand the strength of the army of Dark Underworld. I let some people mixed into the army of Dark Underworld. They were bribed by the people of the Immortal Realm to help them kill Yu Qianqiu. I didn't expect that Yu Qianqiu was the messenger sent by you, the Emperor of Netherworld. They knew they were in big trouble. When I sent people to catch them, they committed suicide because they were afraid of you, the Emperor of Netherworld. That's too easy for them. However, it was because I didn't teach them well that the identity of the messenger sent by the Emperor of Netherworld was exposed. That's why I came here to beg for forgiveness. I forgot about the order given by the Emperor of Netherworld. Someone had secretly told her about murdering Yu Qianqiu, but she had just casually ordered her subordinates to do it and didn't take it seriously. She had almost forgotten about it in the blink of an eye. After all, Yu Qianqiu was just a nobody to her. He was just an actor who was appointed by Jin Tai to sing and compose music. He was no different from one of her male pets. She didn't care about him at all. So what if he was killed? However, she was shocked when she heard that the token of the Emperor of Netherworld was in Yu Qianqiu's hands. She wasn't afraid of the messenger who was involved in the assassination of the Emperor of Netherworld. Yu Qianqiu didn't reveal his identity. It could be explained to the Emperor of Netherworld as a misunderstanding. What she was afraid of was that the series of secrets behind this would be exposed because of such a small matter. Once the Emperor of Netherworld found out, she would be doomed eternally. She would rather die than live. Therefore, this murder, which she didn't care about, immediately attracted her attention. Soon all the people who were involved in this matter were killed and the clues were cut off. As soon as she let out a sigh of relief, she found that the silver-armored 1,000 soldiers had sent someone to investigate this matter in secret. The silver-armored 1,000 soldiers were the close subordinates of the Emperor of Netherworld. Their every move represented the Emperor of Netherworld. It was obvious that the Emperor of Netherworld had his eyes on this matter. She was almost scared out of her wits. That was why she broke into this place despite the fact that the Emperor of Netherworld forbade her from intruding into this place. She had to report and explain to the Emperor first to show her loyalty. Even though all the clues had been cut off, there was still a difference between telling the truth and being found out. She had to resolve the possible crisis in time. The scholar played with her breasts and snorted coldly, "I haven't shown my token for a long time. You want to commit suicide to escape punishment? It's good that you know you're scared. Forget it, let bygones be bygones. Your subordinates need to be disciplined in the future. I will do my best to discipline them." The Madam of Blackpool showed a delighted expression. She hugged the scholar's neck and asked feebly, "You don't blame me anymore?" The scholar's hand slid to her pert buttocks and sighed, "You are a stunner. Without you it would be less fun. Thank you for your forgiveness, Emperor of Netherworld. I will try my best to serve the Emperor of Netherworld." The Madam of Blackpool was delighted. She twisted her body like a water snake. She couldn't help but murmur in a strange tone, "Yu Qianqiu is so lucky. He has been favored by you and given the token of the Emperor of Netherworld. I have never enjoyed such an honor." She had been doubting the authenticity of the token of the Emperor of Netherworld in Yu Qianqiu's hands. It was because she had never heard that the Emperor of Netherworld had contacted Yu Qianqiu. How could Yu Qianqiu have the token of the Emperor of Netherworld? She came here to verify the authenticity of the token from the Emperor of Netherworld. "You don't have to worry about it. I have my own plan," the scholar said with a faint smile. Though he didn't admit it, it was tantamount to admitting that he had given the token of the Emperor of Netherworld to Yu Qianqiu in her eyes. "Yes. I have only one thing to worry about, which is to serve the Emperor of Netherworld well." The Madam of Blackpool let out an extremely charming smile and slid to the bottom of the rocking chair. Her waterfall-like hair covered the lower part of the scholar's body, trying her best to flatter him. After another round of passionate indulgence, the Madam of Blackpool helped the scholar put on his clothes carefully. Then she picked up the clothes on the ground and put them on. She tied up her hair and looked elegant and noble again. However, a hint of laziness still lingered on her face. The scholar stood by the window and looked at the outside quietly. The Madam of Blackpool, who had dressed herself from head to toe, came to his back and hugged his waist tightly. "When I miss you, can I come here and serve you whenever I want to?" she asked resentfully. She wanted to strike while the iron was hot and break the prohibition. Otherwise, no matter how good she was at serving men, she couldn't use the same method all the time. The man would get tired of her sooner or later. "You are in charge of hundreds of millions of soldiers and horses, so you must have many things to report. It's unreasonable to forbid you from coming here." The scholar nodded and patted his hands that were hugging his belly, saying with a smile, "All right, you can go and do your own things. I want some peace and quiet." "Yes." Madam of Blackpool let go of her hands and bowed to him happily. Then she walked down the attic while dragging her long skirt behind her. After she walked out of the attic and turned into a black light, the silver-armored soldier drifted down from the sky and landed by the window. He looked at the scholar with a frown and said, "According to what you said, did you really give the token to Yu Qianqiu? It's impossible." The scholar squinted at him and said angrily, "Why do you always eavesdrop on me when I do this kind of thing? Do you know it affects my mood?" The silver-armored soldier was startled. His face twitched as he watched the scholar turn around and walk down the attic. Then he saw the scholar walk out of the attic. The scholar walked on the stone path around the attic. He was wearing a white robe and walked slowly with his bare feet. He wasn't afraid of the cold and walked to the back of the attic. There was a small path at the back that led to the depths of the forest. He walked slowly along the path. Chapter 1046. The serene wood forest was dotted with specks of starlight. It was the fireflies that climbed up the trees. The moment the scholar stepped onto the forest path, 2 fireflies flew out from the trees, dancing and crisscrossing in front of him, illuminating the path ahead. The scholar trailed behind the 2 balls of light, walking at a leisurely pace, complementing his scholarly attire. The serene wood forest wasn't that big. After the 2 fireflies slowly led the way for several hundred meters, they finally reached the end of the path. The path ahead suddenly opened up, and an exquisite little white courtyard appeared. The 2 fireflies quickly flew over, landing on the roof. There were already many fireflies resting there. The little courtyard was surrounded by white jade walls, and the house was made of white jade. The walls weren't even as tall as a person, and an adult could see everything inside at a glance. There was a door on the walls, but there was no door panel to block it. The scholar stepped onto the threshold with his bare feet, looking at the courtyard that was covered with fine and smooth black sand. Although it was black in color, it was extremely clean and tidy, causing one to not have the heart to destroy it. His outstretched foot shrank back, and hearing the wung wung sound coming from inside, he immediately smiled bitterly. "Can I come in?" "Don't come in if there's nothing important." A clear and faint voice mixed with the humming sound. "Then I'd better come in." The scholar shook his head helplessly, his outstretched foot paused for a moment. Finally, he steeled his heart and stepped on the fine and soft black sand, taking one step at a time as he walked in. On the left side of the courtyard, under the porch, a black-robed woman with shoulder-length hair and half of her face covered by a black veil was turning a stone mill. The wung-wung sound came from the stone mill. There were several fireflies climbing up the porch's pillar, illuminating the masked woman's actions. Under the groove of the stone mill, there was a silver urn. Fine and even black sand was sliding down from the groove, rustling as it flowed into the silver urn. On top of the stone mill, there was a fist-sized feeding hole. The masked woman pushed the stone mill with one hand, while the other hand held a few black divine great spirit stones. From time to time she would put a piece into the feeding hole. Usually, most people grind beans and what they grinded was tofu, but what she grinded was spirit stones. She didn't know what to call the fine black sand she grinded. But one thing was for sure, since it was able to grind a divine grade spirit stone into fine sand, it was most likely not an ordinary grindstone. The scholar left a trail of footprints on the fine sand. He walked to the porch and turned his head to look at the masterpiece he had created. He stared at it for a while as if he was trying to figure out something. In the end, he shrugged his shoulders to no avail. Thus, he stared at the masked woman for a while longer, then clenched his fist and coughed lightly. "Why do you have to go through so much trouble? I can make as many of these things as you want. Are you trying to start a conversation?" The masked woman didn't even look at him. She frowned and said, "There's an obscene aura on your body. If you do that kind of thing again, you're not allowed to enter my door for 3 days. You can even smell it?" The scholar raised his hand to his chest and sniffed, but didn't smell anything unusual. He smiled wryly. "I purposely walked over slowly to get rid of the smell on my body, but I didn't expect." He suddenly paused, looking back in the direction of his little house. In fact, it wasn't far from this courtyard, only a few hundred meters away. Although the masked woman's cultivation wasn't high, it shouldn't be hard for her to hear that kind of unscrupulous and unrestrained moans. He turned around and coughed lightly. "Don't tell me you heard it already?" That woman screamed so loudly, it's hard not to hear it. But this has nothing to do with whether I heard it or not. There is indeed that kind of obscene aura on your body. If I smell it too much, it will affect my divination ability. If it's serious, my divination ability might even disappear. Be careful in the future. The masked woman said with indifference. That kind of erotic matter was tasteless to her like chewing wax. "So it's like that." The scholar's expression turned solemn, nodding his head. "I'll remember it." The masked woman added another piece of divine grade spirit stone into the stone mill's feeding port, pushing it at a steady speed, speaking in an indifferent tone. "Don't beat around the bush. If you have something to say, just say it. What do you want from me?" The scholar stood in the corridor with his hands clasped behind his back. After a moment of silence, he slowly said, "I personally carved 2 Netherworld Emperor's tokens. Other than the one I have on me, I gave the other one to you." The masked woman suddenly stopped pushing the stone mill, and the humming sound disappeared. The scholar who was paying attention to the masked woman's expression thought he hit the nail on the head, but then he saw the masked woman bend down and pick up the silver urn on the ground. It turned out the urn was filled with fine black sand. The masked woman picked up the urn, glanced at the scholar and asked, "Why didn't you say it?" The scholar choked on his words. He watched as the masked woman walked down the corridor, slowly walking to the corner of the courtyard with the urn in her arms. She reached into the urn and picked up a handful of fine black sand, sprinkling it over the courtyard. The scholar rubbed his forehead, feeling a little helpless. "Did you give away the token I gave you?" "Yes." The masked woman slowly stepped back as she sprinkled the fine black sand. "Can't I give it away?" "No, I never interfere with anything you do." The scholar's eyes flickered, staring at the masked woman's back. "But I also know you don't easily interact with strangers. I just want to know, why did you give it to Yu Qianqiu?" "Yu Qianqiu?" The masked woman was startled, her hands stopped moving. She recalled the native with a head full of pigtails she met in the underground palace in the human world, a very strange native. She had divined for him once and discovered that the native was actually someone who had died twice but was still alive. She wanted to clearly divine how he had died, but in the end she couldn't see through him. She wanted to divine his future, but she still couldn't see through him. Even his cultivation couldn't be seen through. She could only guess his name, that he was a person full of mysteries. As far as she could remember, she had only met 3 people whose fates she couldn't divine. However, these 3 people all appeared in the human world where she was trapped, and they all happened to be very close to each other. One of them was Bai Changchun, who had killed the 2 generals of the underworld who were protecting her. The other one was the native with a head full of pigtails. His name was Yu Qianqiu. She had a deep impression of him, so she remembered him as soon as this name was mentioned. However, she didn't give the token of the underworld emperor to Yu Qianqiu, who had a head full of pigtails, and she couldn't give the token of the underworld emperor to a person she couldn't figure out. When she entered the cave of the 9 Nether, she suddenly found an extraordinary female ghost cultivator. She peeped into her fate and found that the future of this female ghost cultivator was unbelievable. This female ghost cultivator was destined to be helped by a benefactor, who would help her achieve an extraordinary future. She wanted to find out who her benefactor was, who could help her achieve such a great achievement, but she couldn't find out who that benefactor was. This was the 3rd person she couldn't divine as far as she could remember. That was why he gave the token of the underworld emperor to her after he had glimpsed a trace of the fate of the female ghost practitioner. He hoped that he could help her in the future so that they could form a good relationship. After she gave the token of the underworld emperor to the female ghost cultivator, she suddenly found that someone seemed to be watching her. She vaguely sensed that the person should be the benefactor of the female ghost cultivator, but she couldn't find out where he was. Now, hearing the scholar say that the token of the emperor of underworld she gave to the female ghost cultivator was in the hands of Yu Qianqiu, she suddenly realized something. Maybe the 3rd person whose fate she couldn't peek into didn't exist at all, but one of the 2 people she had met earlier. In this case, the benefactor in the female ghost cultivator's fate was about to be revealed. It should be Yu Qianqiu with a head full of braids. If he could help the female ghost cultivator achieve such a great achievement, wouldn't his future achievement be even higher? The veiled woman's eyes were full of surprise and doubt, and a hint of excitement flashed in them. She murmured, "I finally found you." This veiled woman was none other than the saintess of the underworld who had met Yu Qianqiu in the human world. The scholar silently observed the expression on her face. Since the first time he saw her walk out of the boundless mysterious forbidden area, this was the first time he saw her calm face reveal excitement and excitement. This woman had always been meticulous in everything and had helped him greatly time and time again. Even when he and Jintai were able to escape from the heavenly tribulation in the human world, it was also because of her, otherwise the 2 of them would definitely be dead. In addition, she had a mysterious identity of walking out of the boundless mysterious forbidden land, so the scholar didn't dare to look down on her and regarded her as a celestial being. It was the first time he saw her show such a rich expression. The scholar felt very uneasy in his heart while he was surprised, wondering what "I finally found you" meant. He couldn't help but ask, "Could it be that you are related to that Yu Qianqiu?" The saintess of the underworld regained her composure and shook her head slightly. "I have no relationship with him. I just met him once when I returned to the underworld and spoke a few words with him." She didn't say clearly whether it was before or after she returned to the netherworld, but the scholar took it as a matter of course that it was something that happened after she returned to the netherworld. He nodded slowly and said, "You must have seen something about the person who could make you give him the token just by meeting him once." "That's right, I remember the first time I saw this brat at the dragon transformation gate." He actually carried Li Guang's youngest son and leaped up the dragon gate, helping that little brat successfully transform into a dragon. Although that little brat succeeded because of himself, now that I think about it, I remember that the Netherworld River Black Carp clan always has a fated person when they leap through the dragon gate. To be able to become the fated person for the Black Carp to transform into a dragon, it must not be simple. There must be some karma involved. I've overlooked it. Help the Netherworld River Black Carp transform into a dragon? The saintess of the underworld was stunned. "Yes." The scholar smiled and said, "You don't really care about it, so I didn't mention it to you." The saintess of the underworld hugged the silver urn and a smile blossomed on her face. She said softly, "He really is an unspeakably noble person. Seems like I didn't guess wrong." Chapter 1047. Noble person? The scholar was startled, and then he said with a faint smile, "You used the word noble to describe him? I'm really surprised to hear such words coming out of your mouth." The Saintess of Underworld glanced at him, and then she grabbed the black sand from the silver urn and carefully sprinkled it on the ground in the yard. She quietly sprinkled handfuls after handfuls of black sand, but when the black sand fell to the ground, it made a rustling sound, breaking the silence. Seeing the Saintess ignore him, the scholar smiled bitterly and looked behind him. He took a step back and sat on the knee-high corridor under the porch. He folded his bare feet and sat cross-legged by the grindstone with his hands on his knees, silently watching the Saintess of Underworld step back while sprinkling the black sand. He thought he was very patient and could wait for the Saintess to finish the whole yard. However, she was so meticulous that he couldn't be fast. 2 hours later, not even half of the small courtyard was finished. The scholar couldn't help but rub his forehead helplessly. He found that his patience seemed to be unable to endure for even 2 hours. Moreover, it seemed that it would take at least another 2 hours. Compared to the long years that he had experienced, what was 1 to 4 hours worth of time? But now, it was unbelievable. He then sat under the eaves and muttered to himself, "Ever since I experienced that great battle in the human world, it was as if I was enlightened. Only then did I realize that the power of heaven is unpredictable. There seems to be a pair of heavenly eyes watching everything, and it's not something that we can contend against. In the long river of time, I, Bai Qi, am not the first emperor of the underworld to rule over the underworld, and I don't think I will be the last emperor of the underworld. I know this, so I, Bai Qi, don't hope to die with the world." Hearing this, the Saintess of the Underworld scattered a handful of black sand and looked back at him. She continued to do things that others couldn't understand and said coldly, "Since you've already seen through it, why do you still come here to nag at me? Don't tell me that you didn't come here to ask me about your fate this time?" Although I don't want to die with heaven and earth, I don't want to end up in a miserable way. If my fate is destined to end in a miserable way, then why can't I, Bai Qi, fight against my fate? It is said that even ants are greedy for life. No matter how magnanimous I, Bai Qi, am, I am not immune. The scholar spoke slowly like an old monk in meditation. A firefly that was hanging upside down under the eaves fell down and fluttered lightly behind him. Suddenly, it landed on the millstone behind him. The flickering light was reflected back by the white jade wall, making the scholar who said that he was not immune to vulgarity seem somewhat extraordinary and refined. Sophistry. "In the end, we're back to square one," the Netherworld Saintess said with a cold snort. "Regardless of whether I'm being unreasonable or not, I'm telling the truth. There's no doubt about that." The scholar looked at her and smiled faintly. "Why did you meet me when you came out of that place and not someone else? Why are you always in front of me? Isn't this fate? This should also be a part of my fate. Perhaps the heavens have already given me a chance to change my fate. Since there's already a solution in front of me, I, Bai Qi, naturally have to fight for it. Otherwise, it would be tantamount to defying the heavens. Don't you think so? Then have you ever thought that perhaps my arrival is an important factor that allows you to walk towards your final fate?" The Netherworld Saintess said faintly. As soon as these words came out, the scholar frowned and fell into deep thought. "AI, you and I have been together for so many years. Humans aren't grass or trees, we can't be emotionless." The masked woman, who was like a fairy scattering flowers, suddenly sighed lightly and said with some reluctance, "It's not that I don't want to tell you. It's my honor that the heavens allowed me to peep into the fate of others. However, they only allowed me to be a bystander and didn't give me the right to reveal the fate of others. Every time I peep into the fate of a person, I feel that there's a voice in the unseen world warning me that if I were to reveal the fate of others, I would definitely suffer the wrath of the heavens. My mother is a good example." "Your mother?" The scholar had a stunned look on his face as he looked at her in disbelief. In the past he had asked her about her origins several times, but he didn't get a single reply. He didn't expect that she would actually mention her mother today. He couldn't help but be surprised as he said, "If that's the case, your mother can also peep into the fate of others like you? Why did you come out from there? What's in there exactly? Can't you tell me about your origins?" "This has nothing to do with you. Besides, it's my secret. I don't want to tell others so easily." The Netherworld Saintess scattered the black sand calmly. The scholar had already expected this. He shrugged his shoulders and suddenly, a faint light of wisdom flashed in his eyes. He muttered to himself, "You were able to give the token to Yu Qianqiu. I wonder how noble this noble person you speak of is? I won't hide it from you. You must know that the unspeakably noble you speak of is unable to not move my heart. I wonder if his nobility can be beneficial to me? The netherworld saintess was taken aback and stopped what she was doing. She turned around and looked at him meaningfully as if she had thought of something. In fact, she had only given the token of the netherworld emperor to that female ghost cultivator, and she had never said that she had given the token to Yu Qianqiu. However, the owner of the token had mistakenly thought that she had given the token to Yu Qianqiu again and again. All these coincidences seemed to have reminded her of something all of a sudden, and she seemed to have peeped into something. She was lost in thought. The roulette of fate had never stopped its operation. It was mighty and irreversible, like the evolution of the endless stars in the universe. It was complicated and mysterious, and could only be described as the general trend. As a bystander, she could see a little bit of it, but she could only obey it. She didn't have the right to reverse it. If she tried to change something by force, it would be useless. Nobody could reverse the evolution of the endless stars in the universe. If she didn't follow the trend, she would be crushed into powder. Having figured this out, she didn't want to tell the scholar the truth that she hadn't given the token of the netherworld emperor to Yu Qianqiu. Seeing her in a daze, the scholar asked curiously, "What's wrong? Did I hit the nail on the head?" His eyes flickered. He was eager to know the answer, but he knew he couldn't force her. He could only look forward to it. The saintess of the underworld exhaled softly. The black veil covering half of her face fluttered slightly, and then she regained her calmness. She stopped her homework and walked to the scholar with the silver urn in her arms. She put the urn under the millstone, turned around and sat down with the scholar. They looked like a couple, but in fact they weren't. The scholar was taken aback again, showing a rare expression. It was the first time he had sat so close to her. He couldn't help but tilt his head and look at her face rudely. She had a bright and full forehead full of wisdom, smoky eyebrows that looked like distant mountains, and a pair of bright eyes under her long eyelashes that were as calm as the autumn water, but sometimes they sparkled as if she could see things that others couldn't. The black veil rested on the bridge of her nose, and the tempting lips under the black veil could be vaguely seen. "I dare to bet that if you take off the black veil on your face, you will definitely be a rare beauty." The scholar snickered. The saintess of the underworld turned around and stared at him coldly. "My father took off my mother's veil because he made a bet with someone. In the end, he died a horrible death and could never be reincarnated. What? Do you want to give it a try?" The scholar couldn't smile anymore. It was as if someone was strangling his neck, and he looked to the front in embarrassment. "There are 3 types of people in this world whose fates I can't see. Firstly, I can't see my own fate. Secondly, there are almighty beings who can completely control their own fate. Thirdly, there are people whose fates are unpredictable and full of unpredictability." The saintess of the underworld suddenly said these words out of the blue. The scholar was taken aback, and then he said solemnly, "There are people in this world who can completely control their own fate? Could they be experts from the immortal realm?" The saintess of the underworld shook her head slightly and said, "The so-called people who can completely control their own fate are not people who can get rid of all shackles and do whatever they want. The universe is vast and full of unknown changes. It is an eternal mystery that includes everything. It is right above our heads, silently watching our every move. It is the heavens that we speak of. All those who go against the heavens will be mercilessly crushed into powder. Therefore, there are almighty beings who want to follow its trajectory and follow the path it leads. They want to pursue immortality like the stars in the universe, and so this path is called the heavenly Tao. However, there are very few cultivators who can truly step on this path. But once they follow the footsteps of the heavenly Tao, their cultivation may advance by leaps and bounds, leaving everyone else in the dust. Those who step on the heavenly Tao will be brilliant and dazzling, and their fates are not something I can see. Of course, the heavenly Tao is hard to find, and it is extremely difficult to follow the footsteps of the heavenly Tao forever. We don't know where the end is, and we will most likely get lost on this long journey. I don't know if anyone can walk to the end." Heavenly Tao. The scholar gasped in awe. The vast domain that he had never touched suddenly appeared in front of him, and he suddenly felt so small. He couldn't help but raise his head to look at the pitch-black night sky. After a long time, he slowly let out a breath and said with a bitter smile, "You suddenly told me this. Could it be that you want to tell me that Yu Qianqiu is a person who has stepped on the heavenly Tao?" "Him? No." The saintess of the underworld shook her head with certainty and said, "He is the last of the 3 types of people I mentioned. His fate is unpredictable and full of variables. I want to peek at it, but I am dazzled. His fate gives me a messy feeling. True and false are mixed together, making me feel dizzy and uncomfortable, and even nauseous to the point of wanting to vomit. I can't sort it out at all, and I'm afraid that even he himself is at a loss and is messing around without knowing why. Chapter 1048. The scholar nodded his head in amazement. To think that someone can have such a fate. It's not an exaggeration to say that fate is unpredictable and full of variables. But then again, it must be extremely rare for someone to have such a fate. Can we say that this is a person with a special fate? The Netherworld Saintess nodded her head and said, "There is a saying that this kind of person is someone who makes a living in the cracks of the heavenly Tao. It is equivalent to giving him a different path from ordinary people and letting him live or die on his own. It's just a matter of whether he can walk to the end. It is unknown whether this kind of person is favored by the heavenly Tao or abandoned by the heavenly Tao. No one can say for sure what is going on. It is precisely because of this that it is full of variables." The scholar didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He said, "But you gave the token to such a person. According to what you said, how can he be considered a noble person? Could it be that you want to see if he can walk to the end?" The Netherworld Saintess thought for a while and didn't reveal that she didn't give the token to Yu Qianqiu. She only said indifferently, "I am just saying. Whether he is a noble person or not is relative. I am just guessing if someone like him, who makes a living in the cracks of the heavenly Tao, can pull some people whose fate is already fixed to another fork in the road of fate." The smile on the scholar's face gradually froze. He squinted his eyes at her and said, "You are saying that he can change my fate?" He suddenly faintly guessed that the reason why she said these words to him for the first time was to tell him that his fate would not be any better in the future. As for Yu Qianqiu, because he lived in the cracks of the heavenly Tao, because he had no fate to speak of, he could not abide by the rules of the game. He could do things that others could not, such as changing the fate of others. Although he didn't know if the fate he changed was good or bad, as she said, it was only relative whether he was a noble person or not. Therefore he deduced that those who were bad to Yu Qianqiu would naturally return the favor. Those who were good to Yu Qianqiu would naturally receive the corresponding retribution. This was the difference between good and bad. Otherwise, why would she give her token to Yu Qianqiu? There was a suspicion that he was trying to express his goodwill. Smart people would often think that they had seen through the propositions, but they would often be fooled by their own cleverness. As for whether it was good or bad, only time would tell. At the very least, that was what the scholar was certain of at the moment. The saintess of the underworld abruptly stood up and turned around to pick up the silver urn. Frowning, she said, "I've already told you that I can't peek into his fate. This is your own wild guess. All right. You've been bothering me for a long time. It's time to go." The scholar put down his leg and stood up as well. He opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something, but when he thought about the other party's habits and temper, he knew that it would be futile to ask anything else since she had already asked him to leave. Immediately he moved to the outside of the wall in a flash. Seeing that she was doing that boring thing again, he couldn't help but shake his head and leave. Strolling along the small path in the forest, the scholar raised his head and lowered his head from time to time. His feet were bare and he seemed to be thinking about something while sighing. Unknowingly, he had returned to the side of his pavilion. Then he turned around and looked in the direction he had just come from. His gaze became firm as he quickly walked back into the pavilion. When he arrived at the window upstairs, he rhythmically knocked on the windowsill. A silver light flashed and 1,000 silver-armored soldiers appeared outside the window, waiting for orders. The scholar muttered to himself as he slowly ordered, "Immediately investigate the whereabouts of Yu Qianqiu. Report back to me as soon as possible." The silver-armored soldiers were startled for a moment. Then they immediately cupped their fists and said, "Yes." Then they disappeared in a flash. Just when the scholar was about to sit back on the rocking chair, a ray of golden light pierced through the night sky and instantly reached the window. A dignified man dressed in an exceptionally gorgeous golden robe appeared. His slender eyes flickered as he glanced at the rocking chair by the window. Then he opened his thin lips and said, "Bai Qi, you seem to be living a leisurely and carefree life. How can I be as leisurely and carefree as you? It's dark here and there are a lot of people who don't listen to me. Unlike you in the beautiful and colorful immortal realm, where no one dares to disobey your orders." The scholar placed his hands behind his back and revealed an arrogant expression as he mocked, "Jin Tai, you don't come without a reason. But what do you want from me this time?" It turned out that this sudden visitor was the supreme emperor of the immortal realm, Jin Tai. One was the Supreme Emperor of the Underworld, and the other was the Supreme Emperor of the Immortal Realm. The scene of the two meeting was not something that ordinary people could see. It's a meeting between old friends, no need to be so harsh. Jean Tai said with an expressionless face, when you came to my immortal palace, I welcomed you with open arms. How can I block a guest outside the window like you did? The scholar snorted coldly, but he still turned around and left with his hands clasped behind his back, opening up the window. Jean Tai teleported and appeared inside the window. Like an indescribably noble emperor, he slowly and majestically paced around the pavilion, examining the furnishings inside. He shook his head slightly and said, "It's still those rotten things, old-fashioned furnishings? As the Supreme Emperor of the Underworld, why do you have to live such a simple life? No matter how simple and plain you are in the eyes of others, you are still the Emperor of the Underworld by Chi who slaughtered millions of living beings in the Underworld. No one will say anything good about you. A king should act like a king and you can't lower yourself." A rotten thing? The scholar waved his hand disdainfully, revealing an unreasonable look as he said, "Don't tell me that everyone has to be like you, sitting on a golden lump, lying on a golden lump, even sharing a bed with a woman is on a golden lump. Aren't you bored out of your mind? A tasteless guy like you doesn't deserve to point fingers in front of me. Of course it's a little simple, but it can't be compared to you. Every day there are a lot of people singing your praises in your ears, and there are groups of beautiful singers surrounding you to serve you. You live like a local tyrant in the world. I really admire you. Groups of beautiful singers surrounding me, but they can't be compared to you. You have a beautiful woman like Hei Chi to serve you. Why don't we change our taste? I'll give you a group of beautiful singers, and you give me Hei Chi a group of beautiful singers for you. You won't lose anything." Jean Tai clasped his hands behind his back and looked at the complicated files on the shelf. Although he was joking, his expression and tone were still harsh and cold. It seemed like he was not born to joke. "Do you think everyone is as perverted as you?" The scholar rolled his eyes and suddenly sneered, "It's not that I can't change it. I don't need those rotten things that you have been spoiling and trusting. However, I am a little interested in Jianghu. Why don't you give Jianghu to me and I give you Hei Chi? What do you think?" Hearing this, Jean Tai slowly turned around and stared at the scholar for a while. Then he nodded, "All right, but not now. When I'm tired of playing with her, I'll change my tastes with you." If someone were to hear that the exalts of the immortal world and the exalts of the netherworld were actually discussing such a dirty deal, what would they think? They would probably feel ashamed of their own inferiority since they could even exchange their own women at any time. Especially Jianghu, who was about to be married. If she knew about this conversation, how would she endure it? The scholar's mouth twitched and revealed a defeated expression. He waved his hand and said, "No wonder even your name has the word D in it. You are simply a natural pervert. But what do you want from me?" "Nothing, I just suddenly wanted to see you." Jean Tai met the other party's sarcastic gaze and said without a change in expression, "There's something I don't understand. How could a lowly pawn of my immortal world receive the favor of a dignified netherworld emperor like you and even give him the netherworld emperor's token? You didn't even give it to that woman Hei Chi. Also, the army of Onyx and that person from the immortal world called Mu Bing worked together to kill that pawn. Why do I feel that this matter is a bit strange? He is also a small character, so how could he mobilize the army of Onyx? Is it related to my external affairs commander? This happened in your territory and with your influence. Don't tell me you didn't investigate the inside story. You and I have an agreement. In order to maintain our respective rule over the two worlds, we must exchange what we need. So, I hope you can be honest with me." The scholar looked at him with a smile, but countless thoughts were running through his mind. This fellow was cunning and vicious and could even be said to be inhumane. He had already experienced this before. Some things could be said, but there were also things he absolutely couldn't let the scholar know. The theory of fate involving the saintess of the underworld naturally couldn't be leaked. Otherwise only the heavens knew what would happen. "What are you laughing at? Could it be that you're behind this?" Jean Tai's slender eyes narrowed into slits, flashing with a cold light like that of a venomous snake. "I just find it strange. With your arrogant eyes, why would you pick a pawn like Yu Qianqiu to make a song? You even specially issued a decree, so how could I not be interested?" The scholar sighed. "It just so happened that I met that brat at the dragon transformation gate. I looked at him from left to right in the dark and felt that it wasn't your style. Since you, immortal Emperor Jean Tai, wanted to praise him, how could I, by Qi, stay idle? Thus, I asked someone to secretly give him a token. However, I reckon that even he didn't know that it was my Emperor of the Underworld's token. When he took it out, he was probably dumbfounded. It just so happens that I'm also bored. I want to see how that brat will behave in the future. After giving a bunch of reasons, he added in his mind, "Surnamed you brat, I spent a lot of effort to help you, so you should be thanking me in the future. Otherwise, with this old fox's viciousness, you'll be dead for sure." So that's what happened. Jintai's slender eyes slowly opened. He believed what the scholar said. With the other party's usual style of arguing with him, it wasn't strange for him to do such a thing. It would be strange if he didn't ask about it. He coldly snorted, "Ridiculous. Only someone like you who doesn't care about your status would do such a ridiculous thing. As for why I asked him to compose a song, you don't need to be suspicious. There's nothing shameful about it. First, Jianghu took a fancy to the song he composed. Second, I heard that the song he composed had an unusual flavor, so I could use it. As for after this, if he can display his talents to please me, I'll keep him if he's useful. If he's useless, someone will naturally take care of him. He's not worth worrying about. Let's talk about my second question. What have you found on your side?" Chapter 1049. I haven't found anything yet. The scholar's expression was a bit stiff. This wasn't something to be happy about. Jintai slowly turned to the window and said indifferently, "Bai Chi, do you think I'm a 3-year-old child? If you can't even find out about this, I think you'd better give up your position as the Emperor of the Underworld to someone else." The meaning of his words couldn't be clearer. He clearly didn't believe the scholar's words. "I want to let you sit, do you dare?" The scholar snorted and also walked to the window. Standing side by side with Jintai, he said, "Don't talk nonsense. I don't have the mood to beat around the bush with you. It's not that I didn't try my best to find out the truth. It's just that I haven't found anything yet. The people involved in the matter are all dead, and some key figures even committed suicide. Don't you think it's strange?" "Committed suicide?" Jintai suddenly tilted his head and raised his sword-like eyebrows. "This matter is a bit strange and unpredictable. It seems that your control over the underworld is really not flattering. Someone actually dared to play this kind of trick under your nose. Haven't you found the mastermind behind it?" "You don't need to worry about my side. I know what I'm doing." The scholar put his hands on the windowsill and looked at the fireflies shining in the forest. He said indifferently, "But you should investigate carefully on your side. There's one thing I need to remind you. This time, it's not only the army of Dark and the father-in-law of your external affairs commander. There are also the subordinates of the King of Black Mountain. The 3 forces are led by Mu Bing. Mu Bing alone can't cause such a big wave. I'm afraid your external affairs commander isn't simple." "The King of Black Mountain?" Jintai's slender eyes flickered. He said, "I've heard of this person for a long time. I heard that he's very powerful. Haven't you investigated his background? He suddenly appeared many years ago. After swallowing several territories with thunderous means, he hasn't made any moves since. He's a bit mysterious." The scholar lightly patted the windowsill and said indifferently, "The underworld is not like your immortal world. The more mysterious a person is, the more difficult it is to act rashly. But this time he actually took the initiative to interfere with me. If I don't do something, it'll be a little unreasonable." Jintai nodded slightly and said, "The Black Mountain King, the Black Nether Army, and my external affairs great commander, These 3 groups of people actually wore the same pair of pants. What were they trying to do? You want to rebel?" As he spoke, he turned to Scholar and said, "Don't be in a hurry to make a move on this matter. Let's get to the bottom of this matter first. It's fine if we don't make a move, but once we do, we must eradicate the root of the problem. Don't leave any hidden dangers behind." Both of us should keep in touch with the progress of the matter. After he finished speaking, he turned into a streak of golden light and disappeared into the distant night sky. He left as soon as he finished what he had to do. He had no intention of staying for even a moment longer. In the surging immortal realm, amidst the vast and tumbling sea of clouds, there was a tall mountain that pierced the heavens like a sword. The mountain was extremely steep and there was no way to find it. It was surrounded by cliffs and precipitous cliffs. Ordinary people could only look up at it and sigh. More than half of the mountain peak abruptly emerged from the surging sea of clouds. One could see the tangled vines hanging down from the surrounding mountain walls. There was no lack of inspirational eagles building their nests on the high and dangerous mountain. A heavenly wind swept through the sea of clouds. As the vines swayed, a series of resounding eagle cries could be heard. Several eagles drilled out of their nests and soared against the strong wind. Behind the mountain wall, behind the swaying vines, 14 unforgettable and awe-inspiring words were carved vertically in 3 rows on the steep mountain wall. The words were each tens of feet in size. The heavenly wind still pushed the clouds away. Even the ancient vines that were as thick as a child's arm could not hide the true appearance of the words. The heavens are heartless and the earth is heartless. I think of you and I will also forget my feelings. The words were deeply embedded in the mountain and had been eroded by wind and rain. It was obvious that they had existed for countless years. Suddenly the clouds gradually turned red. The rising sun jumped out of the distant sea of clouds in an instant, illuminating the heaven and earth. The sword-like mountain peak welcomed the first ray of morning light. A rainbow formed at a visible speed from one end of the sea of clouds to the other end. It just happened to be stranded on the mountain peak that rose out of the sea of clouds. Such a beautiful scene was exceptionally spectacular and breathtaking. It was a wonder of heaven and earth that could not be replicated. This mountain was called the Grave of Love. It implied that it was a grave that buried love. It could be said to be famous in the celestial world. It was the solitary cultivation place of Wang Qing, the leader of the Heartless Palace, the #1 sect in the celestial world. In other words, only Wang Qing cultivated in the entire Grave of Love. The other people of the Heartless Palace did not dare to share it with him. Because under the cliffs of this mountain peak, not only love was buried, but also the bones of Wang Qing after he killed his wife and children and slaughtered hundreds of people in his family. How could the other disciples of the Heartless Palace cultivate in peace on this mountain? Even though this mountain was very big. A tall and thin man stood at the peak of the Grave of Love, with his hands behind his back. His wide blue robe fluttered in the wind, and his unbound long hair fluttered behind him. It was like a dream, giving people the illusion that he was standing at the top of a rainbow. Behind him there was a simple stone house built with a few pieces of stone. He wore a silver mask that covered his entire face. Only a pair of indifferent eyes could be seen in the 2 eye sockets. Facing the rising sun, he was not afraid of the glare and was still calm. At this moment, the silver mask reflected a magnificent color. It was dazzling like a celestial being. Originally, there were no impurities on the smooth mask, but at this moment, because of the sunlight, 2 faint tear stains appeared under the eye sockets, extending all the way to the mouth. As a result, it gave people a strange feeling. It was as if this mask was crying silently in sadness and despair. It was unknown how such a strange mask was made. He was none other than the sect master of the #1 sect in the celestial realm, Wang Qing. He was also the powerhouse who founded the #1 sect in the celestial realm, Heartless Palace. He was able to cultivate in the place where hundreds of his family members were dumped for so many years, and still show such indifference in his eyes. It was clear that his mind was extraordinary. Perhaps, it was more appropriate to describe him as heartless. A ray of light suddenly pierced through the surging sea of clouds, scaring away a few soaring eagles. It landed directly behind Wang Qing, whose long hair and robe were fluttering in the wind. Mei He, the consecrator of Heartless Palace, appeared and bowed to Wang Qing. "Master." Wang Qing did not turn his head, nor did he make any sound. He silently endured the baptism of the wind and the sun, as if he did not notice Mei He's arrival at all. Mei He seemed to be used to all of this and did not mind at all. After bowing respectfully, he summoned a dazzling snow-blue sword from his storage bracelet. The blue was so pure and thorough that its smooth surface faintly gave people a dazzling feeling of snow white. With one look, one could tell that it was an extraordinary treasure, but it was so huge that it could even be described as deformed. The width of the sword was even wider than the shoulders of Mei He, who stood side by side. The sword was more than 4 meters long, and the sword hilt was also a meter long. Altogether, it was a huge sword that was at least 5 meters long. Although the blade of the sword was unusually sharp, it could be used as a bed to sleep. The strangest part was the sword hilt. The way it was forged was not like a normal sword hilt. It was formed by 6 dragons that were as thick as a wrist, hollowed out and arched together. The 6 dragon heads bit to form a handguard, and the 6 dragon tails twisted together to form a sword tail. It was covered in dragon scales and looked lifelike. In this way, it prevented the sword hilt from being too thick, making it impossible for people to grasp it with one hand. It meant that one could grab a dragon from 6 directions at any time as the sword hilt. It could be seen that it was forged with great care. Although it was not Mei He's first time seeing this huge sword, His heart could not help but tremble when his eyes fell on it. He respectfully held the snow-blue huge sword with both hands and reported, "Master." The mythical Fire Palace sect leader Huaxiaozi personally forged this sword for Master. I have already retrieved it. However, this sword is too huge, so it might be a little inconvenient to use. It weighs 13,000 kilograms. In fact, all the disciples of the Heartless Palace were Wang Qing's disciples, including Grey Cloud Xin. Those disciples who received Wang Qing's teachings but did not reach a certain level of cultivation within a certain period of time were all killed by Wang Qing. Now, almost all the disciples in the Heartless Palace were the disciples of Grey Cloud Xin and the group of Grey Cloud Xin's disciples. This time I owe Old Hua a big favor. Wang Qing finally spoke in an extremely calm voice. There was no fluctuation of emotion in his tone, as if he was reciting a paragraph word by word. Owe him a favor? I don't think so. Mei smiled bitterly and said, "The Heartless Palace has been around for more than 50,000 years. Countless disciples have been sacrificed to collect the best blacksmithing metal in the 3 realms, the blue sea gold essence. There's a mountain of it, but he has squandered it to this point. Who knows if he has embezzled it or not? Not to mention the endless supply of treasures, we even gave him 3 trillion divine grade spirit stones as wages, not a single piece less. How could we owe him a favor?" Wang Qing slowly turned around. The wind was still blowing, but at this time, his long hair and robe were motionless, not moving in the slightest. An indifferent gaze shot out from behind the mask, sweeping over the sword in Mei's hands. His voice was calm as he said, "Good sword. Elder Hua's investment in this sword is far greater than what we have invested. Spending 30,000 years to forge this sword, it has far surpassed all of Old Hua's masterpieces. It can be said to be the culmination of his blood, sweat, and tears. The success of this sword has raised Old Hua's refining skills to another level. I'm afraid there is no treasure in the 3 realms that can withstand this sword's sharpness." "It's so amazing?" Mei looked at the giant sword in his hand, which was bigger than a bed frame, incredulous. An unparalleled masterpiece comparable to a divine artifact, truly an amazing masterpiece. Wang Qing expressed his admiration in a calm tone. A majestic aura suddenly surged out from his body, engulfing the giant sword in Mei's hand. A humming sound akin to a dragon's roar reverberated throughout the mountain peak, piercing one's eardrums. The sea of clouds at the foot of the mountain suddenly became turbulent. Mei could clearly feel an incomparable excitement coming from the giant sword in his hand. It vibrated non-stop as if a hidden dragon had awakened and was about to soar into the sky. Chapter 1050. In an instant the feeling became reality. The giant sword that was 5 meters long slowly floated up from his hand. The sharp and piercing dragon roar became a continuous stream that surged through the sky and the sea of clouds. Countless gazes looked over from all the mountains under the sea of clouds. They did not know what was happening on the peak of the Love Mound above the clouds. This. Mei looked at the giant sword dumbfounded. He could clearly feel that the energy in his master's body had been withdrawn. The sword actually had a consciousness and floated up on its own. It was unbelievable. He thought it was an illusion. An unparalleled masterpiece, an amazing masterpiece. No wonder it is the artifact that Old Hua spent 30,000 years refining with countless treasures. Even though it was almost the highest level of praise, Wang Qing's gaze towards the sword was still faint. The giant sword slowly circled around Wang Qing that stood on the top of the mountain. The sword hummed like a dragon's roar. It was like a dragon that had been trapped for countless years had finally seen the light of day and its master. It also seemed to be praying for something. Artifact. How could Huaxiaozi be willing to hand over such a good thing? Mei looked at the giant sword that was filled with spirituality and gulped. He put himself in Huaxiaozi's shoes. If he had forged such a treasure, he would never have handed it over. Naturally, there are things that outsiders do not know. You do not need to know so clearly. A calm voice slowly came from behind the silver mask. One more thing is very important. Although this sword is good, it is only an unparalleled sword in the hands of others. It is far from the level of an artifact. It needs someone to activate it. It is a sword. It needs someone to activate it with a powerful sword essence to give it the life of an artifact. In terms of the strength of the sword essence, who else in the 3 realms but me can activate it? Sword essence? So that's how it is. I have learned. Mei bowed respectfully and stood up straight. He looked at the humming giant sword and said excitedly, "Master, since the sword has been awakened by your sword essence, please give this sword a name." The giant sword seemed to understand his words. It flew faster around Wang Qing as if this was something it had been waiting for a long time. Wang Qing looked at the giant sword that floated in front of him from time to time. After a moment of silence, he calmly said word by word, "I grant you the name Six Dragons Snow Blue." Six Dragons Snow Blue. Every time the giant sword circled around to the front of Wang Qing, a syllable would come out of Wang Qing's mouth and hit the sword. 4 rounds. After withstanding 4 syllables, the giant sword suddenly erupted with a snow blue light. It blossomed on the summit of the mountain. The magnificent snow blue light instantly competed with the rising sun in splendor. Countless people on the various mountains below the sea of clouds looked at the sea of clouds above their heads in surprise. They didn't know if it was an illusion, but they seemed to have seen the sea of clouds that was dyed red suddenly turn blue. However, it was only for a moment, and then the sea of clouds returned to its original color. On the peak of the mountain, the snow blue light faded slightly. Then, it turned into a snow blue treasure light and flowed on the surface of the giant sword. The charm of a divine weapon was undoubtedly revealed. Suddenly, a majestic and unparalleled sword intent erupted from the giant sword. It quickly surged between heaven and earth, forcing Meihe to take a few steps back. Then he forcibly stabilized himself. However, Wang Qing stood there motionless like a mountain. The spectacular rainbow stranded on the peak of the mountain had already been washed away. A high-pitched sword hum sounded. A snow blue light suddenly shot up from the peak of the mountain and shot straight into the sky. It was as fast as a meteor chasing after the moon, dragging a thin and long tail behind it. The swift and fierce sword intent quickly spread out from the top of the mountain like a shock wave. The dense sea of clouds instantly stirred up huge ripples and surged out in all directions. The fiery red rays of the sun quickly cast on the undulating mountains below. All the disciples of the Heartless Palace who were standing outside had their mouths wide open as they witnessed the dense sea of clouds above their heads being pushed aside. Then, the passionate fiery sunlight gradually spread and illuminated the green mountains and rivers like a pillar of light. Although the scene at this moment was extremely majestic, no one was in the mood to enjoy it. Everyone's pupils constricted as they stared at the snow blue light that shot into the sky. Everyone felt the majestic sword essence that shocked their hearts. Everyone looked at the peak of the Love Mound, in admiration. Who else could have such a powerful sword essence other than the one on the peak of the mountain? Only Meihe, who was standing next to Wang Qing, knew the truth. The majestic sword essence did not come from Wang Qing, the master of the sword, but from the sword itself. The people on the surrounding mountains could no longer see the snow blue light that shot into the sky. It seemed to have disappeared into the sky. Everyone watched for a long time. Just as they were scratching their heads, the snow blue light suddenly gave off a bright light and appeared in the sky. It became clearer and clearer, like a brilliant meteor that was rushing down rapidly. The meteor flew in midair. Perhaps it was because of the friction with the moisture in the air, it suddenly produced a magnificent and strange scene that the disciples of the Heartless Palace would never forget. 6 rainbow-like giant flying dragons gradually appeared in the sky and became clearer and clearer. The 6 vigorous rainbow sky dragons shook their heads and wagged their tails as they chased after the dazzling meteor that shone with snow blue light. They headed straight for the vast land. Suddenly, it gave people the illusion that the 6 rainbow heavenly dragons were holding a dragon pearl and flying down from the outer realm to the mortal world. The 6 giant rainbow sky dragons covered the sky and the earth with majestic sword essence and crashed into the peak of the Love Mound. All the disciples of the Heartless Palace turned pale with fright and did not dare to breathe. With a loud boom, the vast mountains trembled. The birds and beasts cried out in fear and fled in all directions. The 6 giant rainbow sky dragons instantly disappeared and burrowed into the Love Mound mountain. It was as if the Love Mound was a dragon nest and they had returned from their travels. All the disciples of the Heartless Palace followed the mountain. After the earth shook, some people looked at the Love Mound mountain and heaved a sigh of relief. After the dust settled, although the aura of the 6 rainbow sky dragons was shocking, it was fortunate that they did not damage the sacred mountain in everyone's hearts. However, this was only the result from one angle. It might not be the same result from another angle. The disciples at another angle suddenly exclaimed. Someone pointed at the Love Mound and cried out involuntarily. The mountain split open. A straight and smooth crack appeared in the middle of the mountain. From the peak to the foot of the mountain, Although the crack was only 1 meter wide, it directly split the love mound into 2 halves. The disciples at the right angle could see a thread of light like a sliver of sky in the crack. They and the disciples at the other end of the sliver of sky exclaimed in shock, "The mountain really split open. The mountain really split open. Quickly report to the elders. Quickly report to the masters. Quickly report to the masters. Don't make any noise. Do what you need to do." Mei's majestic voice rolled from the peak to the surrounding mountains. Hearing his voice, the surroundings immediately became silent. On the peak, Mei, who had finished scolding, looked at the crack that was 1 meter wide between him and his master. It happened to separate the two of them. His master was on one side and his disciple was on the other. Mei took a few steps forward and looked down at the crack. He immediately sucked in a breath of cold air. If this unparalleled sword had directly flattened the entire mountain, he would not have been so shocked. What shocked him was that it had actually split such a huge mountain in half. The cut was smooth. Other than this 1 meter wide crack, the entire mountain seemed to be undamaged. Although the mountain was tall, its rocks were brittle and hard. If it came into contact with a great force, it would be easy to shatter. However, the truth was right before his eyes. It was hard to believe. If it was a mountain piled up with mud, it would not be difficult to do so. Mei exclaimed, "As expected of a divine weapon, as expected of a divine weapon. Its power alone is already so strong. If Master were to wield it, who in the world could be Master's match?" That's not necessarily true. However, at least we have the power to fight back. We won't be helpless and waiting to be trampled upon. This sword just had to be completed at this time. It must be the will of the heavens. It looks like some things are predestined. If we can't avoid it, we can only face it. Wang Qing's tone was calm. He put down his hands that had been behind his back and threw out 2 jade archives from his wide sleeves. He said, "Destroy them after you read them." Yes. Mei's respectful demeanor was tinged with doubt. He did not know what his master wanted him to see. However, after he used his divine sense to examine them, his expression gradually turned serious. One of the 2 jade archives was sent by He Jingquang from the Ash Cloud sect. It recorded everything that had happened after he and Yu Qianqiu arrived in the underworld. It focused on analyzing the unknown events behind the assassination attempt on Yu Qianqiu. It clearly analyzed everything with reason and evidence. Although it was not a 100% conclusive conclusion, the words revealed an incomparably heavy plea for his master, Wang Qing, to make early preparations to prevent a major crisis that might occur. The other jade archive was a message sent by a disciple of the Heartless Palace from the underworld. It also mentioned what had happened in Twilight City. It stated that the assassination attempt on Yu Qianqiu was still a mystery, and that it needed further investigation before reporting. Mei clasped the 2 jade archives together and crushed them into powder with his palms, scattering them away with the wind. His expression was incomparably grave as he said, "I didn't expect the Immortal Palace to make a move against our Heartless Palace. High Deacon's analysis is correct. When Yu Qianqiu of the mystic Immortal City inexplicably came looking for you to cooperate, I was there as well. Yu Qianqiu's actions were indeed superfluous. I didn't expect there to be more than meets the eye. Master, we need to make early preparations. We cannot let the Immortal Palace have their way so easily." "What's the rush?" Wang Qing slowly walked to the crack. He looked down and said calmly, "Whether it's true or not, before we are certain of victory, we will not make a move. Don't make a fool of yourself. The fate of Heartless Palace does not lie in how well prepared we are. It lies in the battle between me and Jin Tai." Chapter 1051. Although his tone was flat, the arrogance in it was obvious. Mei replied respectfully, "Yes." But he was excited and shocked. The meaning of his master's words was very clear. That was, with his master's current cultivation, only the immortal Emperor Jin Tai Kai was qualified to fight with him in the entire Immortal Palace. As for the others, they could not stop him at all, so there was no need for him to take them seriously. Wang Qing stretched out a wide palm towards the crack that had condensed into a claw. A snow-blue light buried at the bottom of the abyss shot out with a whoosh, and flipped in the air above the mountain peak. With a clang, it decisively stabbed into the ground not far behind him. Although almost half of the sword body was inserted into the stone ground, there was still a large part of the sword exposed. The flowing snow-blue light had already disappeared, and under the sunlight, there was a bright spot on the mountain peak that was shining brightly. This six-dragon snow blue sword was quietly inserted into the mountain peak. From beginning to end, Wang Qing didn't touch it even once. In the next few months he still didn't touch it even once. In fact, he rarely even looked at it. The man and the sword faced each other from a distance, only communicating with each other through their minds that outsiders could not see. It was not until a few months later when Wang Qing left the mountain that the six-dragon snow blue sword was pulled out of the mountain peak. "If there is nothing else, you may leave," Wang Qing said indifferently. He seemed to remember something and took out a small red box. He held it with both hands and said, "Wuxia wanted me to give this to Master." Wang Qing did not ask what it was. He took the red box and held it in his palm in silence. After he left, he slowly opened it. The box was filled with snow-white silver sand. He tilted the box slightly, and the fine silver sand flowed out like water, drifting with the wind into the distance. Gradually, a snow-blue ring buried in the silver sand was revealed. He stretched out 2 fingers and picked up the ring. After the red box was abandoned, the silver sand rolled out and fell into the crack under his feet. This was a ring that was slightly wider than an ordinary ring. The material was obviously the same as the material used to forge the six-dragon snow blue sword. They were both rare blue sea gold essence in the 3 realms. There was a huge independent space in the ring, several times larger than the 10 spaces in an ordinary storage bracelet. However, this did not fail to attract Wang Qing's attention. His gaze landed on the inner surface of the ring. The 2 words Ruoyun were engraved on it, causing him to be unable to shift his gaze away for a long time. After a long time, Wang Qing sighed softly and said to himself, "Old Hua, are you reminding me to remember something?" Not many people knew the meaning of Ruoyun. It was a woman's name. It was the name of Wang Qing's first wife. Also, what no one knew was that his wife's surname was Hua and her name was Ruoyun. She was the sister of the Lifire Palace's sect leader, Hujun. Back then there were 3 siblings. The eldest was Huahualai Huakongzi, the second was Hujun Huashaozi, and the third was the younger sister Huadai Huruoyun. However, before the Lifire Palace was established, the third sister, Huadai, had already married Wang Qing. Other than those involved, no one else knew about this. Holding this snow blue ring and silently looking at it for a while, Wang Qing finally put it on his left index finger. In the Paradise Wonderland, in the back garden of the Immortal Palace's External Affairs Great Commander's mansion, the well-dressed Mu Tianjiao sat in a pavilion and silently wept. The quality of the golden robe was very good, and it didn't get wet even after being soaked. Her tears fell directly on it. Her right hand, which rested on the stone table, held a jade archive. She did not know when Wu Xiong had appeared beside her. She was in a daze and did not notice him. Wu Xiong also looked at her silently, his face dark and gloomy. He didn't expect that even with so many people working together, they still couldn't kill Yu Qianqiu. His plan to assassinate Yu Qianqiu without anyone knowing had actually caused such a huge commotion. It was truly beyond his expectations. The people over there shouldn't have made such a big mistake. Otherwise, no one would have an easy time. He asked himself this question more than once. However, this was not what worried him the most. What worried him the most was that Yu Qianqiu actually had the token of the Emperor of the Underworld. Without a doubt, the matter would be blown out of proportion. Once the token of the Emperor of the Underworld was revealed, it would be impossible not to attract the attention of the Immortal Emperor. Fortunately, he received news from the other side that the matter had been resolved and that there was no need to investigate further. However, the other side was also urging him to leave the Immortal Palace as soon as possible. Otherwise he might be in danger. However, Wu Xiong knew that if there really was danger, he would not be able to leave even if he wanted to, since he was already being watched. Therefore, he mustered up his courage and went to the Immortal Palace to seek forgiveness from the Immortal Emperor, Jin Tai. He said that his father-in-law had used his name to collude with a group of people to seek revenge on Yu Qianqiu in the underworld. He was guilty of negligence and asked the Immortal Emperor to punish him. In the end, the Immortal Emperor Jin Tai said that the ignorant were not guilty. A mere Yu Qianqiu was not as valuable as the life of his External Affairs Grand Commander. However, he did not want this to happen a second time. Wu Xiong heaved a sigh of relief and thanked him profusely. Although it seemed like he was safe for the time being, his heart was still stretched taut. He was prepared to find a suitable opportunity to leave as soon as possible. He had just returned from the Immortal Palace when he saw this scene. His gaze fell upon the jade archive in Mu Tianjiao's hands. He sighed softly and said, "If I had known this would happen, I wouldn't have had people deliver the news from the outside world to you every day. Mu Tianjiao raised her head with tears streaming down her face. She looked at him and choked with sobs. You knew all along? News travels slower in the underworld than in the immortal realm. When the news spreads in the immortal realm. Wuxiong walked up to her and patted her shoulder in consolation. The news from the immortal palace arrived a few days earlier than you did. I've been thinking about how to break the news to you. I'm also very sad that something has happened to my father-in-law. However, the dead are dead and the living have to look forward. My condolences, madam. As expected, he went to seek revenge on Yu Qianqiu. I've been worried. I told him that he was no match for Yu Qianqiu, but he wouldn't listen. Mu Tianjiao suddenly stood up and grabbed Wu Xiong's hand. She lost control of her emotions and asked, Who did it? Who killed my father? Those people had no grudge against my father. Why would they want to kill him? Was it Yu Qianqiu who did it? Wu Xiong did not know how to answer her. The public news in Twilight City was that another group of people from the underworld had killed Mu Bing, but he knew in his heart that he was afraid that Mu Bing had not experienced such a big scene. He was afraid that he would be implicated if things got out of hand, so he found some reliable people to cooperate with Mu Bing. Those people would not kill Mu Bing at all. In fact, the people involved in this matter knew very well that at that time, Yu Qianqiu was outside the dungeon. There was no one else in the dungeon who would kill Mu Bing except for Yu Qianqiu. However, he could not say such words now. He only deeply regretted agreeing to Mu Bing in the first place. Wu Xiong looked at Mu Tianjiao and sighed slightly in his heart. The reason why he was jealous was that he really cared about this woman. Otherwise, he would not have done such an impulsive thing. According to the news from the other side, it should not be Yu Qianqiu. Yu Qianqiu was locked up alone in a dungeon at that time. It is unlikely that he would have the opportunity to kill father-in-law. This has been confirmed by the army of Onyx. Wu Xiong said helplessly. But I saw the news that Yu Qianqiu broke out with my father's head. Mu Tianjiao went straight to the point and cried intermittently. Since he could break out of the dungeon, it means that the dungeon could not trap him. It means that he had the opportunity to kill my father. What's more, he has the token of the Emperor of the Underworld in his hand. He can command the army of Onyx. Who knows if the army of Onyx is cooperating with him to put on a show? This woman was as smart as ever. She saw the suspicious point at once. Wu Xiong sighed in his heart. He really did not know what to say. He could only grab her hand and comfort her. Don't worry. The truth will come to light one day. He originally wanted to say something about punishing the culprit, but when he thought of the terrifying Emperor of the Underworld standing behind Yu Qianqiu, he really did not know if he would have the opportunity to settle the score with Yu Qianqiu. After a period of sadness, Mu Tianjiao wiped away her tears and revealed the strong expression that she had when she was supporting the Four Links Chamber of Commerce. She directly knelt before Wu Xiong. Wu Xiong was startled and quickly helped her up. Madam, what are you doing? Seeing that she could no longer kneel, Mu Tianjiao said decisively, My abilities are really limited, and I'm really powerless to do anything about the netherworld. I beg the great commander to help me find my father's body in the netherworld and bury it. Wu Xiong seemed to be in a difficult position. Mu Tianjiao bit her lip. If it is really difficult, then forget it. Sigh. Wu Xiong let out a long sigh. He took out a box made of jade from his storage bracelet and gently placed it on the stone table. He said helplessly, The people of the Dark Nether Army have searched for father-in-law's body, but they couldn't find it. Instead, Yu Qianqiu asked the people of the Heartless Palace to deliver father-in-law's head. It's inside. He was not lying. At that time, Lu Lin of the Onyx Army had considered that Mu Bing was the father-in-law of Wu Xiong, the great commander of external affairs of the Immortal Palace, and had really sent people to the collapsed ground to search for Mu Bing's body. In fact, no one knew that Mu Bing had been dragged several hundred meters underground by Yu Qianqiu and killed. His headless corpse had been cut into pieces and buried deep underground. Naturally, it was impossible to find him at such a depth of several hundred meters. Mu Tianjiao opened the jade box with trembling hands. Mu Bing's twisted head was lying inside. It was obvious that he had suffered a lot before his death. Fortunately, the corpse of an immortal wouldn't rot so easily in a short period of time. Otherwise, it would be impossible to see who it was. Mu Tianjiao's tears fell silently again. She bit her lips until blood came out and forcefully controlled her emotions. She stared at the bloody and empty eyes on Mu Bing's head and said, My father didn't have that much of a grudge with those people. They didn't have to kill him, chop off his head and gouge out his eyes. If they didn't have a deep grudge, they wouldn't have done such a thing. Chapter 1052. Mu Qianjiao's trembling hand reached into the box and touched Mu Bing's cheek. When her fingers swept past the blood-stained right eye socket, she said in a trembling voice, "This is a sword wound. When that person used a sword to gouge out my father's right eye, he must have said, 'arrogant.'" When her fingers slid down to the blood-stained left eye socket, she murmured, "He must have said, 'looking down on others.'" She already had a vague outline of her father's murderer in her mind. Based on her understanding of that person, she guessed that the words he said were roughly the same as what the murderer himself had said during the torture. She slowly lifted Mu Bing's head and was about to hold it in her arms when she suddenly discovered that there was a wound on Mu Bing's lips. If she hadn't accidentally discovered it, she wouldn't have noticed it. It was covered by the blood on his lips. She opened Mu Bing's mouth with trembling hands and immediately smelled a strong, slightly rancid smell of blood. She saw that in the empty mouth, his tongue had been crushed, and not a single tooth could be found intact. The sack was a ball in his mouth. It was obvious that someone had stabbed a sword into his mouth and tortured him. Mu Bing, who was standing to the side, was also slightly shocked. He didn't expect that there was such a secret in his mouth. He didn't know what Mu Bing had said to provoke Yu Qianqiu to do such a cruel thing. His head was chopped off, his eyes were dug out, and his tongue was crushed. Mu Qianjiao suddenly cried out in pain and fainted on the spot. Wu Xiong was shocked and quickly supported her. He pressed a palm on her head to dispel the anger in her heart. After a while, she finally woke up and said anxiously, "My condolences, madam. We will take revenge sooner or later. Don't damage your health because of anger." Mu Qianjiao lay in his arms, tears streaming down her face as she smiled bitterly. "I told you that this person wasn't simple and he had no enmity with us. I told you not to go against him, but why didn't you listen to me? If you hadn't chased him to the underworld, you wouldn't have been killed." Wu Xiong grabbed Mu Bing's head from her bosom and put it back into the jade box. He frowned and said, "From Madame's words, could it be Yu Qianqiu's doing? It's clear that there's a deep hatred between them to do such a thing. Father has you backing him up. Even if he had enemies in the past, most people wouldn't dare to do anything to him now, let alone go to the underworld to kill him. Among Father's enemies, Yu Qianqiu is the only one who has the ability to commit murder in the netherworld. Yu Qianqiu is a vindictive person. Who else could it be but him?" Mu Qianjiao deduced and locked onto the real culprit. "So Yu Qianqiu is a despicable person in her heart. Looks like I misunderstood her." Wu Xiong looked at her speechlessly. After a moment of silence, he said in a low voice, "Don't worry. I will avenge father-in-law sooner or later." Mu Qianjiao neither agreed nor objected. She struggled to her feet and stored the jade box into her storage bracelet. She looked at Wu Xiong with a bitter smile and said, "I want to bring my father's head back to the Four Links Chamber of Commerce and bury it with my mother. Now that father is dead, the Four Links Merchant Guild has no one to oversee it. I want to go back and take over the Four Links Merchant Guild and continue to operate it." In the attic of the Netherworld's forest, the scholar was holding a brush and writing a few words on the silk cloth on the desk. The words were black on the white cloth, and after writing a few words he couldn't help but mutter a few more words. The words were scattered on the paper, mostly fate or heavenly Tao. Looking at his frown, it seemed to be quite troublesome for him. A ray of silver light entered through the window and the 1,000 soldiers in silver armor appeared. Seeing the scholar's expression, he was slightly stunned. After walking to the side and reading the words, he smiled and didn't disturb him. However, the scholar sighed and said, "What are you laughing at?" "Nothing much." The 1,000 soldiers in silver armor cupped his hands and changed the topic. "I found some information regarding Yu Qianqiu. Someone saw him and Grey Cloud XN hiding in the body of a river clam called Xinyu. They took the water route and went against the current of the Netherworld River. I don't know where they are going. Therefore, I contacted some friends in the Netherworld River's water tribe and asked them to help me investigate. In the end, they really found that the river clam was running for its life in the Netherworld River. I reckon that Yu Qianqiu and Grey Cloud XIN are still in its body." Running for their life? Could it be that someone from the Netherworld River's water tribe is chasing after them? The scholar raised his brush and said subconsciously. "The person who found them only said that they were running for their life. I don't think that's the case. They should be in a hurry for something." The 1,000 soldiers in silver armor analyzed and said, "If the Netherworld River's water tribe is really chasing after them, then they shouldn't be running for their life in the Netherworld River. They should be running for their life on land. If someone is chasing after them on land, they don't need to be afraid. Yu Qianqiu has the token of the Emperor of the Netherworld. He can mobilize the army of the Netherworld along the way to protect them at any time. Normally no one would dare to touch them. Why would they need to run for their life? Token. The scholar was slightly startled. Speaking of the token, he couldn't help but think of what the Saintess of the Netherworld had said. Yu Qianqiu didn't even know that it was the token of the Emperor of the Netherworld. Could it be that he scared himself when he took out the token of the Emperor of the Netherworld? Thinking of this, the scholar felt that it was highly possible. He couldn't help but smile faintly and said, "Did you find any signs of where they were going?" They were very careful in the Netherworld River. They tried their best to avoid places with people or many people. They kept going against the current and didn't seem to have any intention of stopping. Before we came, we received a message from our friends from the Netherworld River's water tribe. They said that they would probably enter the endless horizon along the Netherworld River in a few days, the 1,000 soldiers in silver armor said. Endless horizon? What are they going to do there? The scholar asked in surprise. The 1,000 soldiers in silver armor spread out his hands helplessly and said, "They are so sneaky. I don't know what they are going to do." For a moment, the two famous big shots in the Netherworld couldn't figure out what they were doing. The scholar put down the pen in his hand and walked around the table in the attic. Suddenly, he stopped at the window and said, "1,000 soldiers, ask your friends from the Netherworld River's water tribe to keep a close eye on them. Tell them to contact me at any time. I'm going out for a while." After saying this, he turned into a white light and flashed across the pitch-black night sky at an incredible speed. He quickly disappeared into the distant horizon. The 1,000 soldiers in silver armor was stunned. He didn't have the time to say yes. He looked at the words written on the table and pinched his chin as he said suspiciously, "Destiny, heaven's law? It doesn't seem like they are expressing their feelings. Why did they give the token of the Emperor of the Netherworld to Yu Qianqiu and then pursue it? What does he want?" Shaking his head, he couldn't figure it out. Then he also flashed out. Just as the two big shots in the Netherworld Royal Palace said, there was indeed an escaping clam in the Netherworld River. It was a huge clam that had lived for millions of years. With two people in his stomach, Xinyu kept dodging in the Netherworld River. Since he knew that the token of the Emperor of the Netherworld in Yu Qianqiu's hand was fake, he was more afraid than Yu Qianqiu and Grey Cloud XN. What kind of person was the Emperor of the Netherworld? The Emperor could kill him with a flick of his finger. His millions of years of experience told him that it was not shameful to be humble and cowardly. It was best to stay alive. In his smooth stomach, Yu Qianqiu used the meatball in his stomach as a pillow and slept soundly. In the beginning he pretended to be calm and pretended to sleep. But in the end he got over it. Anyway, what was going to happen would happen. He would deal with it as it came. It was useless to worry. He had to deal with it calmly. As soon as his tense nerves relaxed, he really fell asleep. He even snored from time to time. He slept like a log. It had been a long time since he had such a relaxed sleep. He didn't know where he was in his dreams. Sometimes, he dreamed that he was caught by the subordinates of the Emperor of the Netherworld. But when he was locked in a cage, he found that he was in a prison in his previous life. There were prison guards in uniform walking around in front of him. So, he asked the prison guard to get him a cigarette. The prison guard was wearing a big cap, but he said in Grey Cloud Xian's voice, "Do you want me to choke you to death with the smoke?" He immediately cursed loudly. As he was cursing, he was suddenly escorted out of the prison. As a result, he found that he had been escorted into a magnificent palace by the police. The scholarly Emperor of the Underworld stood high above him, smiling sinisterly at him and baring his hideous fangs, as if he was about to skin and swallow him alive. He tried his best to see the other party's face clearly, but it was blurry and he couldn't see it clearly. In the end, he didn't care anymore and teleported back to Utopia. He realized that he was driving a sports car on the highway. He was driving Jianghu, who was dressed in sexy clothes. He told Jianghu arrogantly, "We've taken out the money we left in the Swiss bank. We can live comfortably for the rest of our lives." Suddenly, dark clouds appeared in the sky. Grey Cloud Xian's old face suddenly appeared in the sky. He stared at them in the car and snorted coldly, "Do you want money or your life?" He looked like he was robbing them. The most terrifying thing was that Jianghu suddenly turned around to look at him. She had a beautiful face, but she said in the same voice as Grey Cloud Xian, "Do you want money or your life?" In the end he woke up with a start. He suddenly sat up and looked at his surroundings. He immediately heaved a sigh of relief and fell back down. He waved his hand at Grey Cloud XN, who was staring at him with a twitching expression. Old song. I had a nightmare just now. You were talking everywhere in the dream. It gave me a fright. Nightmare? You smiled and asked for cigarettes, and you withdrew money from Switzerland to live comfortably. You call that a nightmare? Grey Cloud XIN said with a mocking expression. He couldn't help but exchange a few words with Yu Qianshou, who was talking in his sleep. Oh. Yu Qianshou immediately jumped up like a spring. He pointed at Grey Cloud XN and exclaimed, How did you know? You even know about Switzerland? *CK. Did you transmigrate here too? Transmigrate here? I flew here okay? Grey Cloud XN sneered and said, You talk a lot in your sleep. It's hard for me not to know. I say you're really broad-minded. You're already in this state, yet you can still sleep and have sweet dreams? Yu Qianshou was stunned. He had been talking in his sleep. He could talk in his sleep? He was slightly shocked. He didn't say any secrets that couldn't be exposed, right? It seemed like he couldn't sleep in front of strangers anymore. It was too dangerous. He wanted to ask Grey Cloud XIN what else he had said. Suddenly Xin Yu's voice came. Everyone be careful. We're about to enter the Netherworld River in the Endless Horizon. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.